ideas coming out from people. And so I think this is perfect timing that we do a follow-up here and bring out some of the, I guess, more detail on some of the points that we had already brought up. So I think this will be great. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
So where do you want to start? We've already covered sort of the basic points of the article, talking about the history of the Vatican and the Papacy and the Jesuits and all of that. And then we started getting into what's been taking place since these recent Paris attacks. It's spiraling forward by the day. There's so much more happening. And where would you like to start off and kind of address for people today?
Well, it absolutely has to be said that even though quickly it's confirming what we have been talking about, there's a lot of people jumping in the way too early when they speak about false flags and so on. And it's not to say that false flags don't happen, but this is like the latest national fantasy. And it's one of these fantasies in which when you have it installed, if you're going to say something's a false flag, and then you end up doing it without even waiting for the actual first initial reports of a particular incident to come in, well, I want people to be able to see the lunacy of that. That is a fantasy, and you can't get out of it. Then the rainfall is, it's raining today, it's a false flag. Once you bite down on that, it doesn't mean that it's not true in certain instances, but once you wear those glasses, then everything that happens, is immediately thought of as that. And then this is what we know as a national fantasy, and it's those things that are dangerous. If you go back to the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution or the rise of Nazism, it's the politicians being able to play on that. So the person who tells me that something is a false flag, I immediately go to them, I will discuss that with you only if you first admit that the government is not only capable of creating false flags, but creating a pseudo-false flag after a legitimate incident takes place. If you can accept that, then I know you're open-minded enough to listen to what I have to say, because false flags are not just natural false flags, like in other words, they're done in the normal deliberate way to be false flags in a pure, although, criminal way. There's also a secondary kind of false flag, and that is whenever even a normal incident occurs, like a crash of a jet, or a car crash or a suicide by a particular individual, suddenly the media can be ordered to paint that as a false flag, or at least the alternative media can be, and they can run off, some of them well-meaning, but again, that can be the duplicitous version of the false flag. So this is the problem. But again, the main point that we've been making in these programs is that you can go wrong with false flags. There's all sorts of pseudo stuff there. There's all sorts of difficulty. But you can't go wrong if you follow history. That's where the certainty lies, because no individual man, no individual media outlet is in charge of history. They've been participating in it in the past, but the message of history stands as a unique lens into the way things happen and the way things are done. So you need to keep your focus on, what's going on in the world, which people are pretty much up to. We've spoken about that before, that with the help of the media, help of the, internet, and some of the new paradigms like conspiracy theory and alternative research, people are up to speed. But you see, I don't want them to be up to speed in one area, but then extremely weak in another area, which means you're so hyper-focused on current events that you forget the messages of history. This is vitally important. And so when people like myself emphasize that, we're often called right-wing, and, we have people on our social media condemning us out of mind for that. When all we're really trying to do is actually avoid extremist action, avoid violence, by pointing out that there's something very wrong when foreign elements can enter into the West in this level, in this frequency. There has to be other reasons with that. It is something wrong, and it means that there's something rotten within the body politic. And again, that if you're looking back to the history, in this case of Islam or the Papacy, whatever, that's the testament of history. That is not somebody convoluting it. That's not somebody lying to you. That is something pointing out what history has said. And the person who cannot accept that, which is unfortunately a very, very great many people today, especially in the mainstream, are deeply, deeply culturalist people. Or they are literally been liberalized, communized, mind controlled into the sense of loving that fact, that they don't even know they're culturalists. And then they're opening the gates of Western civilization, to all sorts of foreign elements, not realizing the impending danger to centuries of culture that you didn't create. What can happen to the artwork, the poetry, the architecture, and so many other motifs. We're embedded in it, so we take it for granted. But, literally the people we're talking about have buried whole cultures. They've mass murdered their way through history, and they literally have put Egypt to untold desecration, that every tourist who's even been there has many times remarked to a tour guide, what's all the chipping about? Why is all these sphinxes and temples defaced? I see more defacement than I see actual, relics. Oh, well, yes, that's, yes, how do we explain that? Religious fanaticism, the complete erasure of a previous culture. And you think these Muslims are any less, guilty of that than the Western people? The West has done it, Christianity's done it, Catholicism has done it. But it's happening today, and it will continue to happen. At least in the previous years, people stopped doing that. But the Islamic group, is still going on. And the main point about that is if you lived anywhere east of, Baghdad, the Islamic threat is known throughout the whole world. See, part of my family, as I said, from the northern India, right? So I've grown up with Muslims, I've grown up with Hindus, Jains, you name it, Sikhs. And the Islamic threat, David, is well, truly known. It's only in the West that the crimes are downplayed by these disingenuous types. It's only in the West, the decadent West, where evil literally gets invited to dinner and all sorts of excuses are made. You go to this very day to the East and ask anyone who's a non-Muslim over there, do you know anything about what Islam is? And they'll bloody be happy to tell you. And it'll be barbaric. It'll be, totally explained in crystal clear. The frightful devastation of your Suhartos over in Indonesia and wherever else, Ceylon, India. Oh my goodness, all over the world. I mean, these are people, Genghis Khan and these types wanted to literally wipe out the whole of Europe in order to graze some sheep. So this is literally the level we're talking on. It might have been okay for the time of Genghis Khan, but it's certainly not okay for our modern cultural Western societies.
And it's good points. And I think that when we think about this, we have quite the situation. I mean, we do have a legitimate threat from these sort of extreme Islamic and religious fundamentalists, but we also have this criminal government behind the government operating at the highest levels in sort of what you would call Western powers that are sort of dictating that, as we've indicated, on sort of a grand chessboard and playing off these different forces against each other and trying to divide people here at home, trying to divide people in those areas. They have their own agenda that's sort of separate from maybe the Islamic agenda or any other agenda. So there's basically a lot of players on the board, and it can get quite confusing because what we've been uncovering since events like 9/11 is that we do have a corrupt element within the Western governments here in America, Canada, Europe, and we realize that there's these groups that are trying to look for more globalization, more centralization of power, more centralization of control through economic means, etc. And then you've got the remnants of these battles that have been going on, which is coming out of these different religious groups that are fighting amongst each other, and then we've got these extremists that are being brought in here, and on we could go. How do we help people understand and navigate it? I mean, I know we've gone through it in detail in the other shows, but just in sort of a nutshell, like when we're looking at this, I think a lot of people they confuse what you've been saying, Michael, as being, oh, well, you don't think it's these corrupt globalist elite bankers anymore? You think it's the actual Muslims? And I don't think that's at all what we're saying. We're actually trying to bring out more of this tapestry. So maybe we could help clear up some of those misunderstandings for people.
Yeah, well, the first thing to realize about that is, the red papacy is a monumental attempt to point out who the real predators are. And therefore, once you grasp that point, and that they work through NATO, that they work through the EU, they work through the hundreds of different orgs, it's also helpful to know the rivalries. That's what we did in the last two programs, is show that even with the Jesuits and the papacy, or at least in the article, I show that, they're not all cohesive. They do have rivalries. But when you have identified this power at the top, then it makes sense. So lower-level mannequins, lower-level lieutenants like the Zionists, they are a threat. So is Islam a threat. But always remember that the power at the top, these lower-level mannequins wouldn't have any power whatsoever. There wouldn't even be Zionism. There wouldn't even be Judaism today if the Catholic Church didn't want it. Always where you had the Catholic Church on a chain, behind it you had Zionism. Or more correctly, you had the Jewish shtetl nearby the great Templar cities of the world. This is demonstrably true, and you even had the same versions of it in the Eastern world. But you certainly had it in the Western world, in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, France, and then even in England. Wherever the Templar went, and we're talking about senior Catholic psychopaths here, you had the Jewish lackey right behind. It was the same in the Moorish era. People have to know about how the Islamic people worked close in hand with Jews during the period of the Moors. We've already spoken at length about how they did it with the Ottoman Empire, how the Jews were so deeply involved. They were even a little bit more than just servants in that instance. There, in that particular time, they actually rose to be the controlling power. That was a fluke, although even in the Moorish empires of Spain and Portugal, they also had a great deal of power, but never as much as they had in the Ottoman Empire. And then when the British government came along, the Jew was exalted yet further. The British establishment felt that the Jewish, not just the Jew, the Jew has been as victimized by the people we're talking about as anyone else. We're talking about high-level Freemasonic Jews like the ones we were talking about before, coming out of the Ottoman Empire and helping to establish Israel in the beginning. But these were elitist Jews who were Freemasonic, and they have a very different vision of the world. They actually, go back to Atomism, the Order of Melchizedek, and all of that other stuff I've dealt with in my other work. But if you pare all that away, you just realize that these were rich Jews, and even during the British Empire, people thought, the establishment in Britain thought, we really need to give these guys an inroads now. They've been very, very helpful. And so that is the reason for the rise of Zionism. But if any of those establishment forces had decided, well, no, we've used these people now, they've served their purpose, we want rid of them, they would have been gone centuries, decades ago. None of these people have any autonomy. Israel itself lives on the donations of Western countries, and even all of the goods and items that they have is donated from the West. And it's the same with Islam. Islam is a puppet that never would have been allowed autonomous. They've already been dealt with in times past. And so they knew at one point in time, they knew where their limits were, and that they knew that they could only take pretty much pygmies and primitive races to believe in any of the rubbish they were teaching. And if they've ever risen to power in recent ages, it is entirely, as you say, because of the complicity of Western powers. That always has to be borne in mind. That's right. Just as the Zionists would not have existed without tremendous patronage from the Western governments, so it was the Islamic. They'd been taken care of in the past. They'd already been put in their place. And they basically knew for many, many centuries that, they're only, like El Cid, again, going back to the movie, that was a true incident, and they were defeated. They were put in their place time and time again by Western powers. So they kind of knew that, they could only get a bunch of primitives from the equatorial lands to believe in their religious nonsense, And so if they rise again, it is definitely utterly by Western manipulation, possibly even Western meddling. But again, we do know that, this was, a lot of it was pragmatically done. We've made that point, that never forget that Western governments themselves have been weak from inside. So if you see them doing things that seem reprehensible, and by God, I agree they are reprehensible, but never forget that that is because you don't have solvable, sustainable governments in the West. None of these things that we have in the West, since the time of Roosevelt and even before, right back to in England, back to Disraeli, any of these things are governments. They're not. They went wrong, almost from the start. And if you read the right works, you'll be able to see not only where they went wrong, like I have all these books posted on my forum to show people where what we call government, what we call left-wing, right-wing, all of that stuff, liberals, whatever, that's not government. That's just a charade, and so they were weak inside. They were bumpkins running around at the behest of secret societies, just pragmatically doing what was needed to keep the West under control, because it was growing at a phenomenal rate. All sorts of religious nonsense was being thrown off, the secularization, the progress, the scientific awareness, the incredible independence of human beings. All of this was a threat to this papacy. And so they had to do something about it. And so the governments that we're talking about, that we think ruling the world today, are powerful, obviously, but under that power, they're weak. Under that power, nobody really knows what the real agenda is all about. They've had to do a lot of scaffolding, and they've done a lot of different things. And every now and again, they throw up a nutball, like Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or Suharto, or there's so many, and believe me, that's not just in the West. The white man has not just been the only perpetrator of evil in foreign countries. These people have had their own types murdering each other for centuries, But when we're talking about the West, we definitely need to realize that every now and again they do throw up a nut ball or a cartoon character or some crime lord, to be a people's champion, to tell them to do this and that and the other. And hey, people, if you do that, if you vote for me, I'll make sure that you get this, because I know that you've been burning for this, you've been burning for this, you've been burning for women's rights, or you've been burning for better jobs and better pay. I will promise you to give you at least one of those things, but it's a deal. You have to give me something that I want for that. We go, yeah, no problem. We've been waiting more for those big screen TVs. Come on. We've been waiting for more, more play, less work. We'll do what you want. And I think that if we get caught up in that, then we have a very, very difficult time. But again, as I said before, just, going with a message of history, you and I, on the last conversation, spoke about, that one of the scenarios, it was close to the end of the first interview, I think, but we mentioned that one of the scenarios would probably be that the papacy wants to bring in, like the EU troops, the UN troops, and it likes to see the chaos. And what do we have just 2 or 3 days ago? The Pope calling for a new authority. Now, this is after our interview.
Yeah, that's true. I did notice that, and I wanted to find out your opinion, because that's not, that's so interesting that that Pope has called for a global governance system already, a global financial system already, and now they're calling for a global military. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, backing up completely what we were saying, and maybe even sacrificing Sweden to get it. These people look at geopolitics as, gee, we got to sacrifice Hungary now? Oh, tough that. All right, go ahead, do it. We got to sacrifice Sweden? She's tough, But they don't look at these countries like we do. They just look at them as full of some fungus or mold. These people are just shoppers and, TV watchers and useful idiots, So, yeah, we got to sacrifice that. It's okay. And then you even had a report yesterday from them saying Britain is now declared a non-Christian country. Shouldn't even be bothered to act like a Christian. Again, after our interview, I was talking about this very thing, that if Christianity, it's another way of saying what we said in the interview, that if even non-Christians would have been willing to defend Christian morality, if Christianity had ever been what it purports to be. Remember we said that?
Right, it's true. Yeah, we're not just saying Christian in terms of the religious dogma of Christianity. No. We're talking about what we would consider our Western culture, or the moral elements of it, and the fact that we're separating ourselves from these other Eastern philosophies. Like, it's a totally different understanding.
Oh, there's been many, many great people who, having not been Christian by religion, have supported Christianity for whatever reason, because they thought it, had a certain morality and it had a certain tradition. And, I'm not a Christian myself. I'm not religious in any sense that would be known as religious, because it's all based in faith and belief, and that's nothing to do with me. But at the same time, if Christianity had lived up to some of its higher ethics, some of that stuff that's in the Ecclesiastes and some of the teachings of, their Jesus, as fictional as he was, at least, there's certain good things there, then people would have been able to defend it, and that would have supported it, and then there would have been less foreign elements. Christianity is highly to blame because it was corrupt in itself, hypocritical, sanctimonious, tremendously insincere. So that we mentioned that, and then just yesterday, here's it now: publicly told that certain groups are just saying, forget the veneer, Britain, you're not Christian, and so if something else is entering in, be it Judaism or be it atheism or be it even Islam, you're going to have to roll up the carpet, let that happen, because you don't have, you're not Christian. And to a very strong degree, that is sadly true, because Christianity has proven so corrupt in its own self. It's lost so many people's faith. Good people who might not have even been part of their religion necessarily, but was still given it a nod and certainly would have come to support it in a bad day. And now none of that exists. The young generation has nothing to do with it. And then when you even go from that level, educated people who studied the whole concept of papal supremacy, which I'm writing about in the papal article there, the papacy, but other people who don't know the detail that I know, or like reading these articles, but they do know that this thing is rotten to the core with its pedophilia, its absolute feeling of supremacy. I mean, you can go to Encyclopedia Online and actually put in papal supremacy to save us the time here in spending an hour to talk about the hideous monstrosity of it. Go read it up yourself. There's actually, put in the terms papal supremacy and you'll see what I mean.
Exactly.
How potentates, oh my God, how they thought of themselves as being so above everybody else. And that's history again, But again, for this, we said a lot of this in the previous interview. One thing I wanted to add is that I mentioned it in Irish Origins books, so certainly I've mentioned it in the Atlantis book, and that is that, look, everything that happens today, what we call governmental or political, is often actually an act of sorcery. So when you go up to the highest level of perception and sort of, like I said, keep your eyes on the ground and look at the headlines and be aware of what's going on, but always be able to pull back immediately like a proper forensic detective and then be able to say, but wait a minute, there's something going on here. The puppet masters are very high up and I've got to sort of plug in repeatedly. How do I do that? Well, that's from reading the greats, reading the Tolkiens and the C.S. Lewis's, and C.S. Lewis predicted everything that is happening today. He did it in his book, The Last Battle. It's the 7th book in the Chronicles of Narnia. I think it's the 6th book because he put the magician's nephew at the end, which made it the 7th book. But The Last Battle is in the series, is the last book. And if you read that book, everything of today's world is already predicted, where he has his Mongol race of what he calls the Kalormans, destroying Narnia, basically destroying the lands of the West, and doing pretty much what they're doing now. And that is also part of an agenda. Now, that's true. It may be that the papacy, the supreme power, wants to take out the West. In the last interview, we talked about that scenario at length, that they have always thought of the Western world as a kind of an experiment. They're extremely peeved and they are very disapproving of the West and all of its different experiments. They think those experiments have failed. They've actually helped it fail. If you read the Red Papacy article, you'll see how that comes about. And their so-called modern fronts, after John Paul II, and their modern front of charity and democracy and United Nations stuff and compassion, for the world's suffering. That's all a sham. And anybody falls for it is completely ignorant of their history. They haven't made any turnabout at all. It's just a sham. But if they decide that they want to penalize the West, then we spoke in the last interview, that this is indeed one of the ways that they're going to do it. But through Islam. They can't really use Zionism anymore, do you see? Why? It's because Zionism has got very decadent. Zionism is about as Western as any Western thing could be. And so the Western Zionist, who's been helpful to sabotage other Western systems, other Western dispensations, that were highly cultural. The Zionist has been used to bring them down. And he's been used to tenderize places like Canada and America, to politically correct the place. But you see, there is a limit to that agent's ability, just like there is, on a particular other government body. We're the local police, we can't help you. You have to go to the FBI. Or we're the local mafia. You're going to have to go to somebody else to get that done. Well, it's the same thing with Zionism. It's not omnipotent. They're going to say, we don't want to take down the West because we've just inherited it. We've just inherited it as a plaything for centuries of other service to you. So we're not interested in bringing it down. We like it. So then the higher Vatican guys goes, damn it, we can't use these guys. The phone, they don't answer the phone anymore. Even the right wing or the left wing guy, we can't get any of these people. They're all out walking the dog. What the hell's going on? He's always on the golf course when we're calling. So who do we turn to? So our theory in the last program was that they've turned to Islam to be this hateful horde and boy, these guys don't need any incentive more than, to be triggered by their hidden elites that created them in the first place. And there's a good case I'm very interested in the, I don't, we don't have time to talk about it now, but the whole idea that the Vatican even created Islam, what we know to be Islam. But even if it was the Vatican as people know it, it certainly was Atomism, it certainly was the solar cult, it certainly was the same people that I've exposed throughout my work. So they can call on these Islamists any time they want, because as we just said at the beginning of the interview, they could have taken them out any time they wanted. So these Knights Templar are in seniority, and whoever's behind the Templar are even senior yet again. So when you see that, so as we said in the last interview, it could be that this Islamic force is a little bit more eager, less reticent than the average Zionist. So they're now being they're being given the money, and they're let loose on the world. But there's another thing that we didn't get to in the last one, and that is this. What happens if the powers that be are now actually saying that both these glove puppets have really outdone their stay? What I mean is that even Zionism is ready to be basically, folded up or just parked, and that Islam is now going to be taken out itself. It would be wrong of us to only point out one side of it. While we're looking at all this news about these invasions and migrations, we might also be forgetting that would also be, and I'm just speculating here, but this is what we have to do in this movement in order to stay abreast of what's happening. You have to speculate. What would happen if it is Islam that is ready to be taken out? And that this is the way to do it, to incite the West. And again, partly this is quite legitimate. I wouldn't be weeping any tears myself if Islam was wiped out. Although I'm not saying violence. I'm meant to contain it. I believe anybody can do any bug crazy shit they want as long as it's behind the walls of their own, premises.
Right. Yeah, we're not saying let's just go and turn the Middle East into a glass crater like a lot of ignorant hillbillies would say.
Well, they'll just replace it with more ignorance tomorrow. If Islam is taken out today, exactly. It'll be some other bug crazy guru who pops out, a flea-bitten camel and says, "Follow me." Here's me Monty Python. It's Andre again. Here, you come, follow me. So you can't in this world get anything like a utopia. So let these guys do whatever crazy shit they want to do, because it'll only be some crazy shit that replaces it. The Shah of Iran and other enlightened despots tried to change it, and look what happened to them. But the point is, if the establishment is saying you people are medievalistic, you have no place in our world, plus we really do want a lot of your oil and stuff like that, because it's not yours, it's part of the earth. So we want it, and we have the right to it because we're more technical and sophisticated than you are. It's not Michael Hassan agreeing with any of this stuff. It's just I know the way these people's minds work. Every single thing that a Western person enjoys, including the coal in their fire, the rubber on the car wheels, is all from extortion of the planet. So I'm in no delusion about whether it's Western powers or Eastern powers who are criminal. The whole of our world is based on some criminal action. So if these boys at the top are saying, our military is getting rusty, and we're just going to take you out. What better way to do it than to incite this kind of, reaction, slowly boil the frog? And so it could be Islam itself that is ready for a blasting. That could be one thing that could be happening. So that's the diametric opposite of what we said before. It's an act of sorcery, but it can work two ways. One is to bring down the West, because the papacy is tired of the West. But then that's a theory. And there are a couple of rebuttals to theory. One is the Zionists, who don't want the West to fall. And not to mention other rich people and potentates who've non-Zionists, ordinary Gentiles, who have lives of living, all over the planet. And they do not want the rabble to be coming up their street with axes in their hand, to take out the rich, because we know where they live. And also then, as I said, they have the Zionists who are saying, we've helped you get this far, but not so that you can burn it all down on us. So there's that to bear in mind. Then I say, okay, then let's flip completely over to the other side and say it could be that Zionism is going to be allowed to remain in a decadent form, but it will not have the power anymore to wield. It's done its job. And also, has Islam done its job? And Islam can be an old enemy to some people within the papacy. It could have been being used, but it may just have simply run out of steam. It is literally so medievalistic that it is completely anachronism to the people at the top. And they've decided now, because I remember that a lot of pundits are correctly saying that since there's no Cold War, the elite are kind of bored and they have to find somebody to be antagonistic with. And I am 100% believer in that. They definitely do. And they'll find, anything to play with and to and they want maybe to take over the land or.
It's also part of the agenda, clearly, to maintain a situation of trauma in the minds of the public in every way, shape, and form. So that's another point, is that if you think of it in terms of just global control over resources and human beings, regardless of their affiliation or their religion or their background or their culture, then you're thinking of it as, if we can keep the trauma going, which you've addressed in so many other bodies of work, then that's the best way to have people relinquish their power, relinquish their rights, to fall for any kind of bullshit we're going to put on the plate for them to eat off of or whatever. And in that sense, we can just have our way with, you know, all the land resources and people. So it's like, it's as long as they can keep the trauma bar up, they're like, we'll take any trauma will do from any group. And if that group doesn't work, we'll take this group. But as long as we can keep the trauma meter running, then all eyes will be off the real Leviathan and on all these superficialities, right?
That's right. And remember, I couldn't agree more. And when I said earlier that it was an act of sorcery, another way to say the same thing is to say that these people are the makers of chaos. If you look back at history, every chaotic thing that has happened, not everything, but a vast majority of the major things that have made history, the witch hunts, the fall of Egypt, you name it, the rise of Christianity, all of that chaos is orchestrated. It's so close to us, we forget. And even the people who claim to know that that is the case, like people in the alternative movement, again, it's so close you often take it for granted. When you really understand that these are the architects of chaos, so they're never going to let down their agenda. This is an establishment that knows exactly what it's doing. And like today, when people say, it's just chaos, I can't make any head and tail of it. I'll make head and tail of it for you. If you see chaos, it is part of a plan. Even the chaos is part of a plan. It's not, therefore, it's not real chaos. It's orchestrated chaos. There's a big difference. Right. Chaos is the Three Stooges tripping over each other. You know, that's the kind of chaos you're thinking about. No. This is the orchestrated form. There's a big difference. And it has worked. That's why you believe it's just chaos. That's why they do it. If it works, reel it out again. And because this particular ability of theirs to create chaos, we don't twig it that that's what it is. The vast majority of people to this day are cultureless airheads who still don't know what we know. And they don't know that the governments can do, the establishment can do it again and again and again, the same basic 5 plans. You know, they haven't really changed their strategies in 2,000 years because it works. And half the world, this is what we've got to realize, more than half the world, probably 80% of the world today, right, is ignorant of all these affairs, even though a lot of it makes up actual history. It's just incredible.
And I guess just to kind of think about it from the other side as well, if they are agents of chaos, and this is what this is about, could some of these events that people try to jump on and say, oh, it's a false flag that, you know, the American government or the French government did, or it was all crisis actors or whatever, it didn't even happen, this is where it's already started to go. Could it have been that they at least maybe have allowed this sort of, they've unleashed their pit bulls and allowed them to run chaotically and commit some of these atrocities so that they could get the type of chaotic response that they wanted? So it goes back to that whole problem, reaction, solution. Either they took an organic event and made something out of it, or they planned it right from the beginning, or they allowed it to happen. You know, either way, no matter which point it is, and everybody's online fighting over which point that is, it doesn't really matter because the chaos was created and the agenda moves on, and they're very good at moving along with the flow and just going with what presents itself. So it could be either one of those 3 scenarios, but irregardless, when we're talking about what you just mentioned, the fact is the goal still gets achieved, right?
Yeah, it does, because they've learned that, first of all, they just like chaos for its own sake. That's what I believe. And that means wars here, battles there. You know, our history is full of it. Obviously, it has to be phenomenologically explained. Well, it can be, because they're mad. But then they discovered something even more incredible. Create chaos, and you get to an agenda to boot. It's like the cherry on the top. So they were going, oh, brilliant. Doing good gets you nowhere in this world, right? Doing evil does. That's what they learned. And the next to evil is stupidity. So they go, even better. This gets better and better. We're standing here in the balcony working this strategy out. And we not only see that we can do what we want to do for its own sake, and then have not only a particular physical, pragmatic agenda fulfilled, but we can have the rest of the planet in stupidity, which is a form of evil, to match the conscious evil that we have. 80% of the people of the whole world is incapable of comprehending the very ideas that we're talking about. They've actually done this. They've actually taken polls, some of these institutions, to find out that 80% of the population are just incapable of comprehending a new idea, even if that idea is beneficial for them. But certainly if it's a contradictory idea to the ideas that they've grown up with, you're out of luck. So 80% of the world around you, David, cannot accept one new idea, even if that idea is beneficial. So do you see the uphill battle against the establishment who know that and say, don't you know, for instance, like judges, courts, anyone who works for the court, police, know that the vast majority of eyewitness reports are not only wrong, but completely contrary to the fact. You know that, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. See what I mean? So they know that the vast majority of people in this world, they don't have it together. And then even with a little dose of mind control or auto-suggestion, not auto-suggestion, but suggestion from without, and that's it. The human being is in your pocket. So these then became the remote control victim. And, I want to know why those things are. My work in the alternative field is just to say, how can that be? If that many people are dumb and stupid and can't even accept a new idea, to me that is a fascinating subject that leaves all other subjects on the side. They're secondary. This is incredible. How can it be that 80% of the world's population, or even just say the West, where you expect them to be, intelligent and expect them to be critical and judgmental and less under the mantle of or religion or whatever. And yet, no, it's the same thing. The working class little pinko commie, he's just going to sit there and blame aristocracy and he's going to blame the rich till he's blue in the face. Oh, it's a millionaire. It's the rich. 70% of the parliament, is the wealthy, and there's only 7% are millionaires. Look, pal. $1 million is very little money. So there goes your argument. What you think is a lot of money isn't piss. So just because you're not a millionaire and that guy is, yeah, but $1 million, any hardworking man can get that. So wrong. There has to be something so much vaster than just owning $1 million. You see, so these arguments are palpably ridiculous. And not only that, but millions have done incredible good throughout the whole planet. So more good than any working class, stooge has ever done in his whole life. But as I say, it's just an example to show you the workings of the mind that has been completely colonized by these useless, ridiculous ideas, and they're sanctified by time, and you cannot then fight it. So then you have to say, well, what do I do then? Because I can then either join the elite and start thinking like them, because then I do see that these are just pawns on the board, and we have to manipulate them. And then if you went down that road, for instance, in me in my own life, if I had ever taken that road, I would be somebody who probably did support, enlightened despotism, or a constitutional monarchy or something like that, And I do study those things, and I know what they can do as alternatives. But I haven't really gone down that road either, because because I haven't. But other people do. Other people who learn exactly what we're talking about start to say, yeah, I see the psychology of human beings. They do need to be led. They are chronically passive. I understand how that even came about. You step on a worm, right, and its head turns towards you to fight you as it's being crushed. The average Joe today, the gates of his culture are wide open. He sits there just reading a newspaper and shoving in the popcorn. He couldn't care less. Hasn't the faintest idea what he stands to lose, So I want to know, how did that passivity take place? It doesn't seem to have always been there. Well, Sid only had the whistle, and hundreds of thousands of people came to his cause.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened? So, I want to know. And so that's then, as I say, you pull a string, it leads to a rope, and then next thing you have an elephant in the room. It's part of the welfare state. It's part of the tenderization. It's government giving bequests, basically, wrongly to so many people who didn't bloody deserve it, and then coming along to tickle you, to tantalize you with taking it away. Well, what we gave you, we might take away. What you going to do then? Well, what I'm going to do then is lean on you even more. I'm going to beg. I'm going to come to your door and beg you not to take away those benefits that I couldn't provide for myself. But I might go to Tsarion and somebody else is on the side, well, mate, stand on your legs. There's nothing wrong with your legs. No, I can't walk, I'm paralyzed. How do you know you're paralyzed? Well, they told me. Yeah, I know they told you. There's an episode of Doctor Who, right, where these aliens steal this guy who's been set out on a deep space flight. And they actually kidnap the guy and tell him that one of his eyes is put out. So all his life he's worn a patch, and he's been in the service of these aliens, these totally evil aliens, right? And later on, when he meets the doctor, they show him that the eye, take off the patch. It's actually kind of comedic in a way. And he takes off the patch, and his eye is perfectly okay. And he goes, oh, blast, blow.
Wow. Yeah,
So
exactly.
you have taken the patch off yourself. Somebody of enlightened witness had to say, take off the patch. Everything they've told you is a lie. And he does it, and he stands there like a complete idiot, thinking, I've just enslaved the earth. Let the aliens in, because they helped me, they fed me, they took care of me when and they repaired my eye. It's like, dude, there's nothing wrong with your eye. So it's like saying, stand up on your own legs. You can earn these things. You can go about doing it. But people have no confidence. They become flaccid, docile. And so they need this nanny state. Well, once you've got people in that level of buffoonery, then you have an army of, instead of an army of people fighting evil, you've got an army of people going, Michael, you're right wing. What's your problem? My God, look at you. You're so full of hate. I'm trying to prevent hate because I know that the evil at the door will turn your world into mush. You'll be enslaved if you're allowed to live. I'm trying to prevent that.
Exactly. And that's my sentiment as well, is that when you're dealing with this level of evil and injustice and psychopathy, then you're going to have to be able to stand in your own light and stand in your own strength in order to deal with even just comprehending it, let alone dealing with it in the real world. And most people aren't psychologically prepared to do that. You get so many people that the minute you even talk a little bit about these subjects or point out any of these negative facets, right away it's, ears closed, eyes closed, don't talk to me about that. Let's go back to talking about Christmas trees or something. And you're like, well, understandably, it's traumatic, and we know that everybody psychologically on all levels are highly traumatized. It's knowledge and education and self-knowledge that would save them from that trauma, which is what we've been pointing out. And if we can get people to that point, then we can start comprehending and dealing with this evil in the world. But we can't just do that when we're sitting, as you've said, just decadent, sitting back, watching this off YouTube and not actually participating or looking at it on the big scale. And participating in developing our own minds and bringing out that courageous element within all of us. We can't just sit back and watch this with a bunch of popcorn on our lap. We have to actually really participate in this as a study of consciousness. So I couldn't agree more with that.
And also, we got to realize that culture is already fragile. It's been assaulted for centuries because, we don't have to do much. We do have to do things, but we don't have to really do much. We just have to have a cultural understanding, and that these things weren't created by you alone. They've been accrued over centuries. Remember we talked in the previous interview about how recent America is, even from an age point of view?
Yes.
Right, well, give it a chance then. It's like, yeah, it's not perfect. It's made colossal mistakes. But that is perfectly understandable when you pull back and see the bigger picture of history and culture. And culture, whether it's American culture or British culture, it's pretty new still. Some of these Eastern groups that we're in conflict with now have been around for a long, long time. And some of the cultural idioms within the West are pretty new. The political systems, as we said, are very new. They're 1700s and close to even 1800s before they even get established. So they have to be seen to be proven to be wrong. And when they're proven to be wrong, that's a very good thing, because then we change them. And that's what the West is trying to do. But this Vatican, this papacy is very, very antithetical to that kind of progress. As I said, it looks at the whole Western thing as an experiment anyway. And now that it knows that these Swedens and these Britons are dissatisfied with the way things are going, Ireland is in a state of mess, and many of these liberalistic ideas haven't happened, so they need to be changed. Right. So the papacy doesn't want that change to happen. It likes the chaos, and it doesn't want even more cultural, more civilized modes of government to come about. What does it do? It unleashes the dogs. So that just about as you were about to sit down and go, look, we have some clearing up to do. I don't think a lot of these politicians know what they're talking about. We need something deeper. Then they unleash the dogs. It's because they know the culture was going in the right way. So, but it does it gradually. But they can come in like a worm tongue and convince you that change is needed now. It's not good. These are horrific things that are taking place. In fact, no, world violence, crime is down. In the West, crime is down. Right? And people were getting it together. So there was a higher level of independence, things that these papacy people, this level of the establishment dislikes, and they've got their fingers on the pulse of it. And therefore, we have to realize the enemies of culture. If you don't know who the enemy is, then you're dead already, because they could be sitting at the table. And that's often how it is done, through this Judas effect. So once you know who the real enemy is, and then you realize what weapons they're using, and that they think of our cultures and our civilizations as utterly perfidious, then we have to realize we have to defend that culture from these kinds of people. Otherwise, because it has already been attacked so many times, from in other areas.
And it's important that we look at this. And I know a lot of people think that when you're trying to critique Islam at this point, that you're somehow jumping on the same ship as the media and trying to hype up and cause fear and spread disinformation about the true nature of Islam and all this stuff. But the fact is, a lot of these people haven't even looked at the actual true nature of Islam, and the history of, as you said before, the fact that we might even be seeing that it's the Vatican and the papacy itself that set it up in the beginning. It was definitely a lot of these incursions into the Middle East that we know that some of these different governments had gone in and actually tried to really weaponize the already fundamentalist attitude so that they can help with the war against Russia and whatnot. But what we need to understand is that there is, as you say, a very dangerous religious sort of mind control element that is involved with this type of religious ideology. I just got, somebody sent me a video of something that's happened in Toronto, which was where I came from, and this is recently. And there was actually, in one of the Muslim communities, they had like a children's play. And the children's play was actually these kids reading from the Quran and practicing on stage how to do a beheading and how to actually do a beheading. And they had these kids pretending to do the whole, imagine a theater production, okay? Parents that are sitting there and imagine watching your kid in a Christmas play where they're just talking about, little baby Jesus, Mary Magdalene and all that stuff, pretty harmless. Nobody's getting tortured on stage. And then the next thing you turn that over to the way, this particular group of Muslims was portraying their version of it. And you've got kids 7, 8, 9 years old, walking up there, and their parents are all sitting there. Oh, look how cute they are. And they're holding scimitars and practicing beheading infidels that don't believe in their religion. And this is all, and there's music fading in, and then they show fake heads and stuff. And it's just this is happening in our own backyard. And yet we're sitting here going, we have to be more tolerant of this religion. I mean, these poor people have been mind controlled since day one. They're having their children indoctrinated at young ages. That is very hard to reverse the further that gets pushed throughout their lives. So I don't know. I just had to get that off my chest.
Well, you're very right, because it has been, but see, to get to that level of docility and pure imbecility, you have to be tenderized. So therefore, their former generations didn't understand that the American experiment had been weak from the beginning. This is even before the Vatican got in. But Vatican agents had already been in. The Hahns and the Rothschilds and the Warburgs, all of these people, the J.P. Morgans, they all served the papacy. And ones who originally didn't serve it suddenly signed on at a later date, right? So when everybody's pointing to the Zionists did this to America, the Zionists did that to America, I know they did. But I know who their big boss was as well. But to get back to the point you're making, they had to tenderize the people, and they did that through parchment idolatry, just like I say in the Constitution Con. They handed documents that had the feel of gold, but they were a gold plate, and the Declaration of Independence and all this other shit that people believe, the parchment idolatry. And by God, it worked, because people didn't listen to the J. Edgar Griffins and the Ralph Eppersons and so many other great people that I mentioned throughout my work. They didn't read their books to find out where the holes were, right? And they didn't. And remember, when an agent is put in, say like a Donald Trump today or whatever, right? That they look good. They look like you. They come across with the sound bites that you might want. Like I said, I'll give you this if you give me that, and this is the way it is. And again, that old bugbear, no grasp of history. The people that we're dealing with have worked to fool the world. They're psychotics themselves. They have to hide their spots. But again, getting back to the point you were making, see, the beginnings of Canada and America, it was all wrong. And the papacy didn't want it anyway, because they didn't want a modern, sophisticated, independent, Protestant, nation rising, which they knew and then would stamp them out. Today's headlines reveal the same thing if you know what you're looking at. What's happened in the modern age now is that up until now, the Vatican did hold out. They held out saying, look, we'll hold out because all these modernistic progressive changes, a lot of them won't work. Our agents are out there to make sure they won't work. So just give us a bit of time and we'll see that, it will collapse and we'll have a restoration. This was a big hope during John Paul II. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been going around the world. They wouldn't have been flying this lunatic, communist, ex-communist, effete around the world, trying to ecumenicalize the whole world. He's kissing everybody. He's out there with the juju doctors and the witch doctors kissing their asses. And they wouldn't have been doing all that rubbish if they didn't think it was going to work. They did that to, polish up and give a better image to the papacy. Again, hoping that they could sanitize their image and, it would work to bring everyone over to Catholicism. It hasn't actually worked. I've said throughout my work that no matter how deep the conspiracies are, no matter how deep the connivances and Machiavellian, plans are, often just the simple movement of history can render them null and void. And this is one that has actually happened. They didn't account for the fact that it would fail. But now that it has failed, right, and these upper papacy types have realized, my God, it's not working. People are not coming back to the churches. They're leaving. They're getting further and further away. Then what do you think they're going to do? Well, the guys who were never allowed at the table, right, when there's three parties, but only two, the left and the right, they said, we're going to go at it first, and you guys, you extremists, we're not going to listen to you. But now those extremists are going, it is our time to come with our plan. You were all wrong. You tried to bring things back. It didn't work. People would rather follow some crazy ass, they'd rather follow anyone today, some Dalai Lama, or, they'd find anyone to follow, some merchant, then they would come back to us. And all this pedophilia hasn't helped. But if you take it all together, they're saying it's failed. So now we just need to unleash the beast. Now, if you remember in my Atlantis book at the very end, I talked about four doomsday, or four scenarios. Actually, not all of them were doomsday, but I did talk about four separate scenarios that could come to pass. Two of those were doomsday scenarios. One was that the descendants of the aliens, the Nephilim, the fallen angels, get off this planet, which they've been trying to do for centuries. And if they get off the planet, it's a doomsday scenario because they'll destroy the planet. There's another doomsday scenario in which is if they realized that they couldn't get off the planet and they ended up having to stay here, then they would rule as a dystopia because their hearts are broken, right? Their plan to get off just simply isn't working. Centuries of time has been wasted. And so now they rule as pretty much lots of different science fiction, fantastic films have shown you, where it's just eternal darkness, eternal plague, eternal poisoning, eternal internecine warfare, everybody just, unplugged so they can go berserko. And what we see I'm starting to see that this could be one of the scenarios, this one where they say they can't get off the planet, we're just going to rule the planet, but we're going to rule it in a disorderly way. There's no point having any draconian order. It's just chaos at large, right? And then the other two scenarios were more favorable. One was that we strike back, but do it badly, and we're all killed off. The whole planet is destroyed by humans trying to take back their power. And then finally, the first scenario, the fourth scenario, the best one, is we strike back all right, but we do it intelligently. We find out what's going on, and we restore our world to ourselves, right? But two of those were doomsday. And what I can see now is that pretty much this second scenario where they are ruling the planet, not able to get off, not able to, so they destroy the planet from within, because remember, they're psychotics and they're doing a good job at being psychotics. And so we could be seeing a doomsday scenario. C.S. Lewis was of this opinion as well. When his Colormans, his Mughal types, these Islamic types, came and murdered all the talking animals and the trees, cut down all the trees of Narnia and destroyed the place. He was talking about that, and he saw it in apocalyptic terms. There was no Narnia left. There was no fighting back, or there was fighting back. That's why the book he wrote is called The Last Battle. But it was of apocalyptic dimensions. And the Narnia, just by the state of things, was destroyed utterly. Just by the ferocity of the war, there could be never any going back, and actually things had to actually go up to another dimension. It is an incredible ending there, which is an apocalyptic scale. And so that could be, as I said, going back to my earliest work, pointed this out, that this could be the way it is. Then, as I said earlier, the flip side could be they're just ready to take out their agents. These are psychotic people, and psychotic mafioso type people go, you know, we've used these agents. What do we need them for? It's time to take them down a notch. And so if I was an Islamic person, or even a Zionist for that matter, I'd be kind of worried, because they can fold you up as quick as they put you together. This is something like, you know, one of these blow-up dolls, one of these, you know, Pinocchios that you put together, and then when the kid is finished playing with it, it's just smashed to pieces. This is something else to be also borne in mind. And so there could be that scenario. Or, you know, the third one is, the target is the West. They're going to unleash the beast with these hordes to bring down the West, because it is the main one in their crosshairs. You know, so we have 2 or 3 different scenarios here. All of them not very pleasant. There are solutions. We can probably get to those in a minute. But, yeah, I certainly am not going to be listening to a bunch of culturalist airheads telling me that I'm a, you know, hate monger and racist. I'm actually glad to be who I am. I'm glad to have the knowledge. Anyone in this alternative field should be glad to be informed, glad to be able to have this objectivity, glad to be not an expert at lying to yourself, and then taking that lying level up to institutionalized level, or teaching it to your kids or whatever it might be. I'm bloody glad that I've got the knowledge I have. I'm screaming laughter at the people who claim that I don't know what I'm talking about. If they only knew.
Yeah, and people should really be focusing on their own development and their own research. I find so many people are wasting a lot of time getting into these little fights and scraps online, which is just wasting a lot of time. And I think that everybody needs to just kind of chill out and start reading some books and start reading some history and start gaining some perspective instead of pointing fingers at everybody else. I think it's feeding into this whole chaos that we're talking about, where you've got everybody that's encamped against this force is fighting amongst themselves, and they're not even putting a proper front line together to go out and do battle with this and finish this once and for all. So that's definitely one point I wanted to cover. What do you think about solutions, Michael? You've often, through all your work and all the interviews that I've done with you, for all those people out there that think that you've been pessimistic in your work, it's absolutely laughable, because you've always been more of an optimist in talking about solutions and trying to say, okay, well, we have to look at the problems. We have to look at the real root cause of the problems. We can't just look at it superficially. And we have to identify that so that we can route it out and then, you know, cleanse and heal again and let the immune system become strong again. What do you think in this regard would be some appropriate solutions for people?
Well, yeah, let's get to those, you know, but I'll just say in the beginning that, yeah, like I said, in the alternative movement, we're here to tease out the underlying causes. I've always said from the beginning, I'm looking at the higher, tiers of the pyramid. We've already been doing that in these interviews, which is identifying the true spider at the center of the great web and distinguishing that group from its lieutenants. Because this higher group that I'm talking about is quite capable of downsizing its parties that were once loyal. It's part of the psychosis. So until you know that, you wouldn't think that was possible. You couldn't think that Zionism tomorrow could be wrapped up because it seems so powerful. You couldn't believe if I told you that, you know, if I was an Islamic person, I'd be worried actually right now. Because you'd think, what are you talking about? These guys are at the gates. They're armed to the teeth. Armed to the teeth? I've even said, we even spoke about, remember in the last interview, that money isn't even an underlying cause of what the establishment does. Do you know that most people in this alternative movement today, and let alone the masses, are absolutely convinced it is money, it's oil, it's petrodollars, it's et cetera, et cetera. Right. That is it. But I'm telling you, that is a complete and utter fallacy. These people own so much crystal, so much gold, so much plutonium, so much uranium. We even spoke as a digression about you remember the Dead Sea Basin and all of that, minerals? Remember we talked about that?
Oh, yes, that was in the last interview, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's an example. Now we can see that in a different perspective. That's wealth. That's wealth. They're not interested in a few oil wells. And if they were interested, they can get it. These people have untold wealth from things, from areas that you have no idea that where they're getting it. The whole of South America has long been put to the sword by the Catholic Church. The Jesuits have raped that land. These are countries as vast as America. They've got those resources. Those resources are not in the people's pockets, and they're not in any Protestants' pockets or capitalists' pockets. They're in the bloody Vatican's pockets. And if they're in any other pockets, It'll be Vatican agents like Switzerland. Who do you think lives in Switzerland? Oh, it's a neutral country, mate. It's lovely up there. Yeah. Do you know that that's where the home of the Alpina Lodge, which basically you have to go to them to get endorsed to be a lodge. Then that's what, if you're going to talk about the Priory to Zion and other Templar lodges and other sort of Masonic lodges, they're being inaugurated. You know, like you have the Swiss Guard and the Vatican, all of these. Switzerland is the home of the richest right-wing Catholics. It's a fabulously wealthy country. Everyone knows about the banks. Who do you think you think Switzerland is run by a bunch of Protestants? Switzerland is the absolute playground of the super right-wing papal groups. So is Italy and other countries as to boot. And if you really do your homework, you'll find out, like I've read in other books, I think it was the Irish Origins books, where even if it has a Protestant front, that's all it is, a front. The two powers that fought at the Battle of the Boyne, that every Irishman is just going to start crying over, they banked in the same bank in Germany. The opposing forces, meant to be Catholic and Protestant, where you can wave your little flags and drink from your little mugs and salute the Pope and salute the Crown. They're banking in the same banks in Belgium. So even if it has a particular front. So this is what it's all about. These are the solutions. And realizing the predatoriness of this group can even take down its loyal parties. And if you look in 2,000 years, this Vatican, how it survived, that's how it survived. It's not just taking down enemies. I'm sorry, I have to tell you. Oh, you've only got part of the picture. Oh, you've a lot to learn. If that's all you think. Well, isn't that a bit like normal? If you have an enemy, you try to take them down and they try to take you down. But this psychotic group is you got a little bit more to learn about them, pal, before you know how they play their geopolitical game. They sacrifice their own lackeys if they need to. This is Sauron. This is Mordor. This is the philosophy and the psychosis of Mordor, mate. Not you better find out what you're dealing with before you sign on.
Yeah, just like the military. Look how they just get these guys to go off and fight the wars for them, and they're disposable. They test all the new vaccines on them. They test all kinds of nerve agents on them, and then they put them in the streets. You go out and serve your country. You come back, you get to live on the streets. But we're going to let in all the guys you were over there fighting. We're going to let them into the country and pay them some of your tax money.
That's right. And I've just been mentioning only two casualties, the hardcore Zionists and these mad Islamists who may be running straight ahead, but they're going to fall into a pit. And we know that because they can't win of us anyway. So they're doomed no matter what. And I wonder, well, wait a minute. Why has it all been incited then? The other thing is this. You know who's about to lose, could lose from? The media. Because the media is about the most duplicitous, worm-tongued, liberalized thing that you've got. And it's been used consistently by the Foreign Office, which is run by the Jesuits, run by the Papacy, and the media is basically run by the Papacy. And basically any of your liberalism stuff, because we've been talking about them thinking of America and Western culture as sort of an experiment. Yeah, let's come down one level to make it more specific. They think the liberalism and the Marxism and the pink, any kind of communism or communitarianism, pretty much every idiom that we have grown up with to accept, the Papacy that I'm talking about looks at all of that as utterly, utterly temporary. They look at that going, that will serve a purpose. That's just another pawn on the board. And even this media, we're using it, and it's doing what we want now. But my God, we hate it, because it is also preached that we've had to use it to serve these hippy-dippy ways and free love and all the stuff that they hate, the modern music, the rock and roll. The media has also signed on for that because that was the cover that it needed to do. Otherwise, it wouldn't reach the people. From the 1940s and earlier, the media had to look swank and hip and whatever in order to work its wonders. So that, plan C, D, and E, let alone X, Y, and Z, could then be moved forward. It had to do A, B, and C first. They had to establish it as this really hippie thing, all of this. And yet, if you study the history of Granada TV, which I've done, this is a TV network in England, it's loaded, provably loaded with Freemasons and top Jews who, as I said, always work for the Vatican. This is demonstrably proven. And yet they are the ones who perpetrated the liberalism and perpetrated these sort of pinko Marxist ideas. But that can be rolled up in a heartbeat as well, as it has been done for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. These people are that psychotic. And yeah, using the little man at the bottom, no problem. So they might, what we might be seeing right now in what's going on now is a meltdown in which they do want the liberals and the conservatives to be butchering each other, the Islamists and the Christians to be butchering each other, right? The Zionists and the Islamics butchering each other. They may want that. They may want that because it's not that. So we will get the wrong end of the stick if we think that it's one side against the other. No, in a meltdown situation, pretty much all of the full institutions, orgs, ways of thinking, ways of seeing break down. Because what happens when that happens? We become psychotic, right? If nothing you can believe in, if things that your forefathers believed in, established, these are like sacred cows, if they can have those screaming into the night, don't you see that most man is 3 meals away from revolution? And they can easily make that 2 meals away, and if they want, they can even make it 1 meal away. So when you're 1 meal away from revolution, we haven't got there yet, but we're moving between about 2 meals, 2.5, it's getting there. And they know that the meltdown will be unbelievable, right? And we are in a Plutonic era. We spoke a little bit about the anecdotally about the astrological tie-in, but that is what I'm talking about, the seismic stuff from the deep core, the deep insecurities, the deep crime that lies at the base of a lot of people's nature, the apathy. And so we need to do that. Now, more to answer your question specifically, we do want to, because this is all very highfalutin, but if you come down to the next level, to really know the enemy, in other words, to implement solutions, you have to really know your enemy, and you need to know the weapons they're using. One of those weapons that the Vatican has used, and you can look this up, it's called mental reservation. And they invented it. Mental reservation. It's nothing more than institutionalized lying. So when you want to know what kind of a devious dragon, worm-tongued piece of shit you're dealing with, just go to their own books, like I've done. And look up the term mental reservation, and you will find out that it's just like the Jews have their own version of it called Kol Nidir, or Kol Nidr. It's like, we would understand it as, when you get telling a lie, you cross your fingers behind your back.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's what this is on an institutional level. The Muslims probably have their own version of it, all right? And it's basically to get what you want. It's basically to justify particular actions. You can lie in the name of a supposedly higher cause, and guess what? If that higher cause happens to be God, oh my God, don't you see that everything's justified? Sure, I'm doing it in God's name, so everything's justified then. I can kill one person, or I can massacre an entire population. What the hell? I'm not defending myself like El Cid. He just wanted to lie around and eat grapes and mow the field and pray to God. Oh, we can't have that. Right? So the other people who are overtly, the Colomans had no reason to come into Narnia. Their lands were 10 times as big as Narnia. What do they want to do coming up there? Well, just to cause trouble. But you can do it in the name of some psychotic god that you've got. And to do that, then you're justified in your institutional lying. And so whether they're sitting on the boards of the United Nations, or whether they're sitting on the local church council, or some corporation, which, of course, Avon Manhattan shows you in his book, Vatican Billions, that it is simply not just a religion, the Vatican. They're more of a financial power than can possibly be imagined, which is why they can then afford all the duplicitous, lying scumbags that appear to be Protestant on the surface, or Jewish on the surface, or Islamic on the surface, or atheistic on the surface. They can afford those people. They've got them a dime a dozen. They're climbing over each other, saying, me, take me, I'll lie for you. Right? And through Opus Dei, Knights of Columbus, they screen people. And other orgs that don't look like they're Catholic on the surface, but they are run by this org, so that they can see who you're dealing with. So this is a black guy over here. Oh, it's Louis Farrakhan. What a hero for the blacks. Oh, Malcolm X. That's right, yeah. And then they can also take you out if you should work it out, which is probably what happened to Malcolm X. He probably signed on and then went, hey, wait a minute, I am a reader. I just don't read what you want me to read. I go learn things. And then when they find out, it didn't work with him, okay, shoot him. We'll bring in Elijah Muhammad. He's much better.
Right, yeah.
He's bat crazy. His eyes stick out on stalks. Well, Malcolm X, he looked like he could be a perfect leader for us, but we seduced him a bit. He went over to Mecca. He did his thing. But yeah, how do I know that when he came back, he really thought about it and said, no, this is bullshit. I think religion in general is bullshit. Wow, he's to be taken out the next day, which is exactly what happened. And it'll happen to anyone. So these boss hogs, they are the psychopaths, and so you have to know psychopathy. And then, absolutely, to answer directly the point you just made, If you want to have solutions, you cannot create a new political system or any kind of humanistic system until you understand psychology. How could you possibly create a perfect system when you don't know what human beings are, what they want, what their underlying existential issues are, and so on? What you will then do is exactly the repeat of what we've got. People who, not knowing the positive psychology, only knowing the negative, they create these institutions, in which man is just sort of like a prey animal in the hunting ground. They treat him as a neurotic and as a psychotic because they are that themselves, and that's about all they know of human psychology. So the only person who can create a system which is good for all people is the person who knows what all people are, what they want, and has to face those facts. We spoke about this in our talk on libertarianism and what have you, when we sort of teased out what might be some systems that still could work in this nightmarish place that we find ourselves. And the idea again behind that was psychology, because maybe it is. If you take a hard look at the people in the world and find out that they are all daddies, they all want big daddy, they're all literally infantile and made of dough, well then maybe we do have to have a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, as long as it's benign. Maybe we do have to have a, what did I call it earlier, what was it, the benign dictatorship or whatever,
Yeah, exactly, some kind of bridge so that we can get to the place we want to go. But it's, right. I think a lot of people expect, one morning you're going to wake up and it's just going to be a bunch of sunshine, ponies, and rainbows. And it's just clearly that's impossible. As you brought up in the point about psychology, we're dealing with a whole population of people that are traumatized on not just an everyday average trauma level, but phylogenetically traumatized. And then added to that, you've got all the waves of history that have gone to produce what we now call the human being and the human mind and psychology. So I agree completely. You have to deal with that first before we think about what we can eventually get to. So yeah, yes. Stepping stone.
And you might not be, that you put it so well, because that's it. That is the solution. We are the solution when we realize where we've come from, that we have this deeply ingrained psychosis. Big Brother has co-opted that. So, of course, we would need to have to heal that, which takes us completely out of the realm of politics and into esotericism and occultism and ritual and so many other incredible things that have never really visited this world. Then we have to realize that on a political level, we may never get further than some kind of enlightened despotism. And we may have to face that. Or no, we might find a sort of a gray area, a little bit of libertarianism, some other mix. But again, whatever it may be, it's going to have to be based on psychology, because, yeah, it's nice to love culture and have your culture and your nationality, but see, underneath all of those things is human as a psychological entity. And this then, all the other things sit on top of that. So when you want to know how to really rebuild society from the ground up, the other stuff is kind of not that difficult. It's kind of easy compared to the underlying discovery of what psychology deals with, which is the man as man, woman as woman, what they're all about. And then when you take a good hard look at that, and why, of course, one of the tangents that comes from that is why there's even psychopathy. We've been saying this time and time again. You will understand from that why there's neurosis. Is it because people are incredibly obsessed with the approval of other people? Sure it is. Half their morality is paper thin, because the morality is only based on doing what you are told to do, because then you'll get approval. Well, we need to know that, because that's not real morality. That's not the morality as Kant and Schelling and others talked about. That's not the morality even of Christianity talked about. But it becomes the morality, the working morality of the world, when the person is so obsessed and will fall into chronic neurosis if they're not getting that approval. You want me to then live in a society and have a government run by people like that? Well, that's what we've got. Well, I don't want it. And that's why I, as an individual, do look into these deeper areas, because I don't want to be prey just running around in some hunting ground to be taken out tomorrow by a bunch of psychopaths when they get around to thinking about it. As you say, through your vaccinations, through your wars, sending people off to kill and meaningless causes of nothing to know about, or through chemtrails or some other. There's so many different poisons. I don't want to live like that, and I don't like to see even this predatory power that I know isn't just a religious institution. They work diplomatically. They work through the big corporations to tenderize these countries. And if they know how to do that, well, unleash those Jews. Those Jews are really good at getting everybody to cry for them. We need our rights. You people are too right-wing. Don't you realize what we've gone through? We want this. We want that. Get out of our way. We had a Holocaust, right? And so they let loose these agents to go on, oh, okay, yeah, no, oh, yeah, really? Okay, yeah, I'll donate, just to shut you up and get rid of you. With all that TV, all the films and the programs, and they go, the Schindler's List syndrome just go over. But that's used. Those people at your door couldn't even be doing what they couldn't even. They would be in caftans. They would be no different than some other boogaloo group from the Middle East. If it hadn't been that, for pragmatic reasons in the past, they were used by elites within their own group, technically called Jews, but my God, there's something so much more going on there, and also Western corrupt ethnists, who are the College of Cardinals, who is the Red Papacy. If you move forward to more modern times, they're called the Red Papacy. Before that, they were, right-wing, psychopathic Catholics dominating the whole world through what we talked about, this papal supremacy. And now they're something different because they're using it through these orgs. An org is a tentacle. An org is an octopus that can morph into whatever color it wants for this and that culture and this and that person. And so there's so many people signing on for it. It makes our job, or the person coming into this subject for the first time is overwhelmed. They can't work out. I've been through so many quote-unquote friends who got lost along the way. They became fanatical anti-Jews, which is ludicrous. Or they became fanatical, something or other, because they couldn't continue along the path. They ran out of juice. They ran out of puff, because it just seemed so overwhelming that they couldn't understand who sits at the center of the web. To do that, you've got to study a lot. And so they got caught in one of the tentacles, going, it's just them, oh my God, it's just this. But then they can't understand. If that was the case, then why are there as many? If it's a Jewish conspiracy, then why do you have J.P. Morgan and all these other, the Barings Bank, and you have all the Gentile orgs as well, Rockefellers and Catholics and Protestants, all signing on, all pointing in the same direction as your average Zionist. So something's wrong with that theory right from the off. You see, so when you displace that, when you start working through it, and you see that, these people are certainly there, they're certainly pawns on the board, but they didn't create the board. They don't have 2,000 years of machinations to see whole other ethoses come and go. But there is one group on this planet who does. And by God, they can control some little asshole Ronald Reagan or Richard Nixon. Are you some Dick Cheney? You mean to tell me that those people look to you that they are so powerful that they can be manipulated, either through a corporate concern or through a religious concern? Get away.
Well, look at George Bush Sr. and look at the whole Bush regime as a perfect example. Yeah. We're not talking about a Jewish family here. We're talking about something that's bloodline connected to the royal families in England, and getting on his knees, getting knighted by the Queen for his service in the war in the Middle East or whatever. So, I mean, there's a whole other situation going on, I think, and I agree with you. A lot of people get stuck on one of these things. It's like the elephant in the living room with all the blind men. They're all feeling it when thinking it's something different when it's a goddamn elephant the whole time. And they forget to look at the bigger picture. And it's funny that you brought up it's what you were talking there about solutions and about how some of these revolutions and these new ways of trying to get in and change society often turn out to become just as tyrannical as the thing they're trying to remove. It's like that warning from William Blake that we've spoken about so many times when he's talking about, the hand that rises up and crushes the tyrant's head grows into a tyrant in his stead. I mean, there are brilliant people throughout all of history that have warned us about exactly what's happening right now.
Well, there was nobody greater or more brilliant than Blake, and he absolutely saw it. Everybody else was a footnote to what he was talking about, although I must say his work is hard to extrapolate what he was saying. But yeah, he knew that. He knew, because he knew the psychology. He knew the deep psychology, not just the stuff I'm talking about. He really knew the deep stuff that you can't even utter. Do you realize that there's actually there's a psychology of man that goes so deep you can't even utter it? I've gone so far as I can possibly with my Atlantis book and doing that with, talking about the alien infiltration and the deep psychology of that and the trauma. That's all on account, isn't it? Or the ancestral trauma. But there's even levels, can you believe it, even deeper than that, that really the human race isn't even ready for yet. And that's why people don't speak about it. So we're there. But at least some light has to be shone on that abyss in order for you then to then, from that point, create bricks that will go to create a society that are really good, really strong bricks. And so that's why what you said earlier about why I'm optimistic is because, of course, that's possible. That lies within human reason to be able to do that. So all we got to be able to do is do it. And, there's been so many mentors like Blake, like Schelling, Immanuel Kant. There's been so many people out there who've already done it, all the way back to Jacob Boehm and even before, to Heraclitus. And we're actually knee deep in people who can help us do it. But those people are often, they may tend to be mystical, and some schools are mystical, and others are very phenomenological. And the last thing we have is a phenomenological relationship with the stuff around us, like I was saying in the program on the hermit. What we do have is stupidity. What we do have culturalist people who say, oh, you can come in any time and destroy my culture. Sure, I'll just sit here and watch it and roast some marshmallows while you're at it. Not realizing that your arse is going to burn by doing that. And not realizing that there will always be somebody at your door or at your gates ready to destroy you. It's not just this horde today. There will always be that. That's ontological. It comes with the territory. So you have to have gates that they can't penetrate so that they finally go away. But if your bastions are weak, if your bulwarks are weak, then the fungus and the parasites will be coming in. Same in the body politic. So, immunity, psychic immunity, cultural immunity, racial immunity, these are not bad words. These are very essential words. And then once you have that immunity, do you not see it's not bigotry and racism? Because then the other races who are watching take a model from you and do the same thing themselves and improve and progress. If you're a cultural healthy thing, other enemies might even say, we've been trying to shake hands with you, but with a closed fist. Maybe we should open that hand and say, you're doing well. You've got things for your people that we really admire. But if we sell that out, which we've been doing since the birthplace of America, America first had, a policy of non-intervention into the cultural disputes, political disputes of other countries.
Right.
When that went down the tubes, that was it. That was over. It's like I say, one of these things that, you can have a constitution, you can have all these things. But it doesn't mean shit if one president, one statesman comes along and turns it round. I can't remember the name of the moron that first got America, to bow down to changing that non-interventionistic rule. But it happened. And immediately 100 evils come from that. And one of the biggest evils is that if your country was strong, don't you think then that South America would have been free? Don't you think that South America would have been jealous? And South America would say, hey man, tell us how to do it. Or, we want to send experts up there to North America. We want to open negotiations. And by the way, part of that might lead down the line to throwing off this Vatican yoke that South America has had on its back because it wants to keep you in a medieval situation. Do you realize the consequences for South America's evolution if America had remained completely strong instead of falling under Roosevelt and getting involved in foreign wars? I believe that if it had never done that, South America would have been liberated from religion and it would have been incredibly wealthy today, and there would have been change all over the world. The Tsar of Russia didn't want to do it, had already done it. D-O-N-E, done it. Sent ships, sent money, sent agents. Germany had done it under Bismarck until the French declared war because the British Illuminati, and it's the papacy, it's the strict observance, it's Grand Orient, all of these are traced back to the papacy, stirred up Latin France to declare war, and that was the Franco-Prussian War that then laid the seeds for the First and Second World War, right? But it was also to make sure that a tripartite relationship couldn't exist between Russia, America, and Germany. A new empire, completely benign. How many people who are listening to the sound of our voice even know about that? How many people know that the railroads in North America were being built by Swedes and Norwegians and Germans, and that the German high officers, Bismarck's people, were observing that and funding that and helping with that? And that would have been, it was such a successful project that would have led then to a collaboration, an alliance between Germany and America, and that would have meant that even Russia, one of Germany's age-old enemies, would have eventually, maybe not right away, but within 10, 15 years, joined that alliance. First, they would have done it only, provincially, but eventually, within about 20 years, this world would have seen one of the more powerful alliances that would have shaken to the core the evil alliance that is centered in Britain and then took over America after the First World War, right, by dragging America into the First World War and then finally the Second World War, unleashing the Zionists and all the other hordes of chaos that we've seen ensuing into the modern world would have been offset by the Germanic Empire, which would involve confederates of America, can you believe that? And then also Russia would have had no choice but to come in on it. And the old animosity between Germany and Russia would have been healed. And not only healed, but there would have been untold prosperity in the world, because then that would have included a proper alliance or a continued alliance with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was very favorable to Germany. In fact, a German German technology that ran what we know as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So when Franz Ferdinand was shot, right, which launched the First World War, that's why. It was to break down this coming alliance. And if you read the works of Bismarck and Ludendorff and many of the people of that era, what I'm saying is completely confirmed. That Napoleon III of France, who was a British agent, and one of the most pompous, ludicrous creatures that ever has sat on a throne anywhere, the gormless twit that he was, but he was controlled by the British establishment, by the Lord Palmerstons and that kind of person, you see. And they moved in to use the barking dog of France at the heel of Germany during Bismarck's time, and the alliance, this is actual fact what I'm going to say right now, that the letter of the ambassador to America, which had to do with this alliance between Germany and America, was on Bismarck's desk pretty much the same day that they had to declare war on France because France was so belligerent. And so the whole pact between America and Germany was put on the shelf. And then again, we know then was never picked up again because of the war. So this is what I'm talking about.
Wow.
Yeah, German was nearly going to be the national language of America. It lost only to a couple of percent to English. The vast majority of industry was either Anglo-Saxon, Scots, Irish, Nordic, Scandinavian, or German. And that can be proven because some of the biggest projects in the north, there's probably a lot in the south as well, but pretty much the ones that were galvanizing the north were Germanic and endorsed by the German ambassadors. Things were going really well. And that was the alternative history of America. So when I say that stick your Constitution, stick your Declarations of Independence, stick all that facade and then the Hollywood shit that came later, all of this decadence and imbecility and skateboards and I don't know what garbage came out of it. All this polyglot, multicultural, misogynistic shit. That's the alternative. That's the diabolical version. So when I said if you want to know how to create a solution, you've got to know that for everything that exists, there was an alternative. And there was a shadow, reality running parallel. But society, history, your Henry Morgenthau's, your Barbara Tuchman's, all the scumbag teachers in the colleges and universities of America and the writers of the history books, they made sure to demonize every figure that represented that shadow development, whether it was the Tsar of Russia, whether it was Franz Ferdinand's people, he himself and others around him, whether it was Bismarck, Ludendorff, they're going to be demonized as they were. But Lord Rothschild, right? Shining star in the heavens, right? Benjamin Disraeli. All the people they put in front of us. Lloyd George, Winston Churchill. The list goes on. Right? Paragons. What could we have done without them? They were psychopaths, and if you read the right books, you'll know that they were. Alcoholics, womanizers. They were not statesmen. These were not people of any caliber. These were dirty, filthy rats who, like I said, could take up one hand and have you funded for a while, a particular agent that they needed to use, and by the next hand, wipe them out, like they did with Lawrence of Arabia. Wiped him out. Used him and abused him, wiped him out. And everybody else. But then later on it's your, Louis Farrakhan, Malcolm X, let's build every boulevard in America. Every city's got one named after Martin Luther King. I mean, what the hell is this shit? So these are all the pseudo-realities that were built over something infinitely more powerful. But because that stuff was aristocratic, because that stuff had real virtue and real morals, real loyalty, and because ultimately, had it been created, then in its shadow, nothing perfidious could exist. So just like in my Irish Origins book, I talk about when we're dealing with prehistory, that because the Arya were taken out, then your churches, your Christianities, your Judaisms could all exist, because they couldn't in the light of Judaism. So it is the same method today. Anything that grew up politically strong, and I'm a believer those things were there, as we're talking about. They were there. People think they weren't. When are we ever going to have a perfect day? It's never going to come to pass. Sorry, back up there. It's already existed. But the thing is, you don't know about it because everybody that created it was demonized and lampooned. And you weren't meant to know that, because if it ever did come to pass, it's not that it would have been perfect right away, but if it had come to pass, nothing of the perfidious stuff that we know today could have come to pass. Not at all. Not one of these morons that we see, from the time of Roosevelt onwards right up to the present governments today could have existed. It just simply was impossible. You couldn't have had the Foreign Office of England taken over by the papacy. You couldn't have who did we talk about last time? It was the Supreme Court, the corporations, the Federal Reserve, all of these institutions. I'm not swayed by who happens to be on the flyer. Who everyone knows publicly run these institutions. You think I'm that fool? Well, 30 years of research, and I'm meant to just believe what's on the flyer that they themselves have printed?
Right, yeah.
I've got the documents that show you that almost everyone on the Council on Foreign Relations, and that's accepted to be the true government of America. Yeah, but most of them were trained in Jesuit college, including people like Brzezinski, and especially somebody like Madeleine Albright, but many others as well. So when you see this person jumping up like Pelosi or whoever it might be, even Donald Trump. Oh, but Donald Trump shaking hands with the Saudis. Look at him. 1 minute he's favoring Islam and then the next he's not. Well, back up. Whoever said Saudis was Islamic? Is that what you think? Oh dear. Oh dear. You have no grasp of history. The Saudis are not Islamic. The Saudis are British agents. And they're papal agents. So again, these concepts, we've got to really, but as I said before, when you know who the real predator is, it's no problem. Now, tomorrow I'm going to be doing other projects on this. I'm working on one that is more about Ireland, and it shows you the collusion, age-old collusion. We're talking famine, and then going back even further than that, through the Norman invasions and what have you, showing the collusion between the crown and the gown, between the Vatican and the crown. And what that will do is show completely and forever that whenever you've got a rotten monarchy, even if they claim to be Protestant on the surface, for pragmatic purposes, for mind control purposes, to galvanize empire and to keep a third party out, two evil archies will get together. Saruman will link up with Sauron if it suits him, because there's a rival group to be prevented from rising. It happens. In fact, it happens a lot. And then when you take up, say, an individual history of a certain individual place like Ireland, you can prove it. So I've still work to be doing where I'm showing this collusion. And it is so fascinating that then you start to understand how the real game is played and how much these Knights Templars and all sorts of other Catholic organizations, control. And then the many that are not overtly Catholic, they may only use it through symbolism, like the 12 stars of the EU. You have to decode the symbolism aspect, which can be difficult. Or even a bona fide president of a country appearing to be a Protestant, like Blair, and then suddenly he converts to Catholicism, malarkey, or another one even over in Norway, and everybody thinks, oh, what a wonderful guy. He's a real atheist, he's agnostic, he's kind of free of all that religious claptrap. Is that fucking right? Yeah. And then tomorrow you find out, wait a minute, no, every one of his kids was going to Catholic school or something like that. You've got to find out. And believe me, there are plenty of whistleblowers in this field, much more elevated in status than I was. You've got your Ever Manhattans, you've got your Father Albertos, you've got your Riveras, and you've got your Edward Parises and so many other wonderful, wonderful authors who can take you through a tour so that you are under, like I am now, under no delusion about who really controls the upper tiers, how the lower level stupidity and evil gets to be created. And then you can make sense. So even on a lower level, if you say, oh, well, this looked like a false flag, or, oh, did these Western powers, for instance, aren't they kind of partly responsible for funding such a... Good, yeah, but it's not for the reasons you think. That's just one of a sea of different machinations in the world geopolitical strategy. You can't just focus on that and hope to extrapolate, and then you're doing it for hours, days, weeks, as I've been watching, and yet not a single word, not a peep about the real, or, and that's because you've either fallen for the parchment idolatry. Oh, well, England's a Protestant country. Sure, the Catholics are hardly any, they only represent a very small percent. Yeah, but that could be said of Judaism, but look at the power of Judaism throughout the world. So, yeah, there's so much more depth. A lot of the things we've been talking about, people actually know, but they haven't properly digested it, which is why in other interviews I've talked about people need to go over the stuff again. You haven't synthesized it all. You've read labels. But if people want to go over my own articles, that's fine. But even in general, a lot of the work that they have, even books on their shelves, read it again. Don't assume that you know it all, because there's gems in there that you've passed over. And there may be even books you haven't even read that you've always meant to read. But people can start with my own work, Constitution, Con, all of that. Go and look at that stuff on the Michael Tsarion website. Start there. Go to my forum, which is basically an encyclopedia You don't really need anything else there because there's so many directions you can go in from that point. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me. That's what I'm saying. I put these things up so you don't have to agree with me. These are sources. And so that people can go and look at it and see, because I've been on the inside of a lot of this stuff. I grew up amongst Muslims. I grew up amongst Marxists, and I've even grown up amongst religious fanatics and so many other, I've been an insider in several different ways. And so I've seen it on different ways. Like I said at the outset of this interview, if you go further than Baghdad, you won't have any problem getting an intellectually astute Sikh or Hindu. These aren't prejudiced people. These are people of very egalitarian religions for the most part. And they will happily tell you in blatant, clear language of the devastation of Islam in their land, to the villages, to the women, to the men, to the animals, to everything. There was a king called Aurangzeb, right? He was related to the Shah Jahan who built the famous Taj Mahal. And I can't remember right now if Aurangzeb came after or before Shah Jahan. Now, Shah Jahan was what was known as an enlightened despot. Meaning, even though he was a Muslim, he wasn't a fanatical one, and he didn't go around actually killing any people. Even though he still supported a religion, he was part of a religion that did. But Aurangzeb is the hammer of India. And when you went in to meet the guy, any dignitaries, anybody from the foreign worlds came in to see this tyrant, this Mughal tyrant, they were amazed to see a string going from one side of the wall of the palace to the other, and on it were human ears.
Jesus.
Says, you fuck with me. That's what, just so you know, when you're a diplomat coming in here, who you're talking to and what might happen to you. And these are not people who just took out their enemies, as you would expect. These are people who took out moderates. These are people who took out little Sufis, little poets, strung them up, skinned them alive. It'd be bad enough that they went after their enemies. Well, we all understand that. But my God, this group goes after people that have not done anything to them. Little paupers, little poets, little harpists and cobblers are thrown in jail and thrown in dungeons. We're talking about oppression that the West has never understood. But always remember one of the loopholes, one of the things that has been sort of downloaded to us that is false, and that is money. It's Halliburton, it's Dick Cheney after his money. He's not rich enough. I agree that you do have to pay off these lower level guys, and you got to keep sending that money to Israel to keep that facade up, and there's lots of facades you need to keep going. Yeah, we know that. The monkey, right? And the organ grinder, they need their dough. But that is much lower. The people at the can be demonstrably proven that the people at the top are so phenomenally wealthy. They own that planet. And if there's something they don't own, they'll get it. For 2,000 years, they've sucked this planet dry. It's not money. It's not. They print money. They own governments. They own the banks. And they can subjugate the whole of Africa if they want to. It's not the white man who's a racist after blacks. Like half the blacks they're downloaders. It's a white man. If we could only get rid of the white man, we'd be fine. And all this other bullshit that's circulating around. It's a particular group of white men that is the biggest enemy more of white men than he is of any other culture. Because if white men was ever taken out, there wouldn't be a culture left. So
just in the same way that these Zionist groups are just as anti-Jewish as a lot of people wouldn't know that, and just in the same with Islam, as you pointed out, some of these people that are just trying to remain in peace and study some kind of spirituality, they're just as victimized by their own religious beliefs as the enemies of that, and it's the same politically and everywhere else.
And they don't have any ultimate love for these lower level agents. America was a Protestant country. Puritans went out there, other Protestant groups, right? The papacy knew they're not going to be able to move in there and have any say overtly as Catholics. They don't have the numbers, they don't have the money, and they're also people are suspicious of them. But nobody's suspicious of a Jew, especially one that you've camouflaged up to look like he's the builder of culture. Ordinary Jews want nothing to do with that. There's whole anti-Zionist groups today. Can we just not live in peace? Can we just not live in peace and worship our God and do what we're doing? And I say, I'd love you to be able to do what you're doing. I have no problem with you people. But you've got a coterie within. Now, who is that coterie? Where did that money come from? Why are they able to rabble-rouse? Because America couldn't be taken down, Canada couldn't be taken down by the Catholics directly. So they have to use groups. But the strange thing is that even though you've got left-wing Zionists who are always ranting about communism and take down the West, they're a minority now. the real big super Jew, is so fabulously wealthy as well, he ain't going to want to burn down the West. He owns the banks. He's having a wonderful time. He's got everybody enslaved. But that level of enslavement is still a benign enslavement. For God's sake, David, we've got to understand this. As bad as people, the federals, rather than being taxed to death and the jobs are being outsourced, and it's just terrible. You don't know slavery. That's bad. I agree, it's bad. It shouldn't be the way of the West. But that is nothing compared to what some people would like to roll you back to. Serfdom of unimaginable proportions. It's happened. God almighty, go and watch it. Your Spartacuses and your, go and watch these movies I sometimes put up and go and check out your history. They'd have you in chains that they'll make your life now look like, oh, that was a pleasantry. I can at least smell the coffee still, still have a hot shower. Oh, where were those days? Where are those days gone? Now that we're in the quarry, dousing ourselves with freezing cold, water. The dog, things can get infinitely worse. This is what the Western person's got to understand. That this parchment idolatry blinded you. This declaration of independence, citizens and subjects. Oh, there's no difference there then. Oh.
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And all the money they had sitting on British organized clubs and British companies, just merely tentacles of the East India Company and Hudson Bay Company and all of that. So it's true to say that they're working through the Zionists. Yep. The Zionist has got rich and decadent. He's kind of useless now in the cause, or he's getting a little bit stuck record. We got to bring in a new enemy that people find very mysterious. They're very afraid by, they are haters anyway of their work, so we don't really have to do much. Hence my criticisms of false flags. The false flag is at the very, very most just a tiny little firecracker to spook the horse. But it didn't make the horse. It didn't create the paddock.
They just need something to trigger the program they've already installed earlier.
Yeah, but it's not in itself of any importance because you can trigger a thing in a million ways. And tomorrow they will. Tomorrow they'll even have another fanatic that even comes out openly in the streets of England going, down with, it's easy peasy. That's nothing to be. But again, people get caught up in the headlines. And then I'm for that. I say, look at the headline. But don't then lose the bigger picture of history at the same boot. And then when somebody comes along to remind you of it, you go, you hate monger. What the hell are you talking about? Your idea of what is a hate monger and an idea of a moderate and an idea of extremist are all about to roll up into a big ball and be thrown out into outer space through a black hole, right? All of these determinations, all of these appellations, all of these concepts. There's only one concept you need to be understanding. It's called papal supremacy. Once you've got that, then you're not a Marxist, you're not a communist, you're not some liberal, you're not some Democrat. They invented all of that. Or they took the works of greater men who invented it and then twisted it to suit their own agendas through their own agents, people like Teddy Roosevelt and the rest of them. Churchill, one of the most perfidious creatures. I could go on for hours about his perfidiousness. And then the other Gentiles who seem to serve Zionistic ends. So then the person goes, it must be Jewish because, all those guys, the rich fellas, at the Yale University, they're all involved. So they were. Yeah, they were. All right, so Skull and Bones was created by Zionists? No, that was created by Catholics, actually. Right, so go ahead. Good, next sentence. What do you mean? It's Jewish, right? Yeah, but you just said that the Skull and Bones and Yale University and half the other more prestigious orgs in this freaking country, including the Pilgrim Society and Mount Perelman Society and Royal Institute of International Affairs, is all full of Catholics. As many of the top officials were, like Brzezinski. He may be a Jewish or a Polish aristocrat on the surface, but he was taught in 2 Jesuit colleges. So how can it be just Zionist? Well, maybe you're right then. Yeah, maybe there is something else running alongside it. That's right. And so once we get to that level, we understand. Then we understand that these people are pragmatists, and that all the political institutions and orgs that you see are basically just to keep things moving so that you don't see the bigger agenda. So United Nations, NATO, EU, that's just to keep the herd, in shackles, paying its taxes, not noticing what else is going on the occult level, not noticing what's going on in the bigger agenda, which you can do the moment you become symbol literate. I can take you around those buildings and you'll immediately see just by looking at the symbolism something is really cockeyed here, as we've done in the female Illuminati at great length, 9 hours of that.
Like the cross and the crown, for example, which is all over all the churches everywhere you go. It's the symbol of the method by which they control humanity.
That's right. Cross and crown, double-headed eagles. Double-headed eagle is the ancient symbol of the Habsburgs. Oh, that's Masonic. Yes, it's Masonic. Do you know where else it comes from? Well, no. Well, long before the Masons got hold of it, it was used by the Habsburg dynasty. Guess who they are? The Knights of Catholicism, the Knights of strict observance, the Knights of the Knight Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights. They were once Protestant, but they flip-flopped many times in history and ultimately are a Catholic order. The Knights of St. John.
Is this why it's used in Russia as prevalent as it is?
Yes, that's right, because basically the Orthodox Church there has capitulated to the Vatican. So it's a Vatican symbol. It was never original. It's the same old royal dynasties, but they're mostly Catholic. They want to bring back the old, they want to get rid of the German Empire, see, and bring back the Holy Roman Empire. All of that stuff. As I said, these have atavistic minds, like we talked about in the female Illuminati. And their symbolism, again, will show you everything. The cross and the crown, remember we went into all that stuff about Cagliostro symbolism and all the symbolism we're using.
Even in the Queen's symbol, is it the lion and the unicorn in chains or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. The lackeys are in chains. They're the unicorns. They're the servants. And again, what we've got to get out of this interview is that those servants are actually sacrificial. Everything that they've done is at the behest of a higher power, and they're hated by that power. They're chained by that power. And that power can easily turn around, as it has done many times in history, and eradicate them. And so one of the things that makes sense about what's going on today, although I still will say it's only a theory, is that these two contingents could be on the way to be, if not taken out completely, then radically downsized. We're talking about Zionism here, and this is within the next 5 to 10 years, and Islam itself. Now, Islam can be taken out really easily. They have no power at all. The Zionists will probably just be downsized because his usefulness has ended. His usefulness has ended. He's sufficiently debauched the world. He's sufficiently debauched the media. He's sufficiently pornographied the whole of the youth culture with his sick art and his sick photographs and his sick Hollywood shit. But basically, outside that, what else has he got to do? It's done. It's done. It's done. And remember, as we said before, most of the Zionists, whether they're right-wing people or the left-wing screwball, and even the left-wing side is really finished. They're actually completely folded up. I mean, they're an anomaly of the 60s. By the 70s and 80s, they were already finished. They're already perfidious and wiped out. But the right-wing Zionist is a super wealthy individual who is yachting around the world on his luxury yachts and swatting golf balls and, living the life of Riley. Why would he want to downsize the West? He might want the working class to be, downsized. That's an old agenda. That's going back to the medieval days when they've been doing that. So that's not new. Again, if you know history, you'll see nothing new in that. Build a few more prisons, lock up a few more criminals. That's all normal. There's nothing anybody's going to be able to do about that. But these guys don't want to roll up the carpet because they've built it. They've enjoyed it. Sure, they just went through in 2008 a massive extortion by way of the American government, didn't they? By pretending their own companies were in debt and then getting these bailouts because they'd already changed the laws through the years to be able to make that happen. But even if that didn't happen, the Federal Reserve has been doing infinite more crimes. So these Jews do not want to roll up the carpet. They want to keep it. They're having a ball doing a tap dance on the ashes of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, for Christ's sake. But you wouldn't know that unless you knew the movement of history and know that everything since the Second World War, like we kicked off with in our first interview on this subject matter, until you've observed that the whole of culture is already in decline, so it can be handed over to the maggots. It's already being in decline from some of the points we even raised here about the lack of that alliance of a benign monarchy, a benign empire coming to bear. And the German Empire, most people don't even know there was a German Empire. There was. And they need to know something else about it. It was completely benign. Whereas the British Empire, of which people know a great deal, was malign with your Crimean War, creatures and Lord Raglan and Lord Kitchener and all the rest. Oh, another one they sacrificed is the Lord Gordon of Khartoum. You see, they sacrificed their own people for a cause. So they've sacrificed their own types. But when you know that everything in society, Western culture has been in decline since the destruction of Germany, And Germany, don't we know, has been so
to demonize, really, right? And demonize and misrepresent.
Oh, that's the word I'm looking. Absolutely misrepresented, demonized for aeons, mostly by Jewish media, but at the behest of somebody else. Once you know that, and you know how to look for it in movies, and when you know how to look for it in symbolism, you'll realize that the Jew is not the head boy at all. In fact, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense. They're certainly agents. They certainly have done their damage, but they are easily, their plug can be pulled at any time, or at least going, oh, you know, we're going to sort of downsize you. So one thing we have to look at is that the rise of this Islam thing is partly to get them wiped out so that Israel can be protected and the Jews get another sacrificial victim. They've always hated the Islamics, even though they've colluded with them. As I said, there's a lot of crypto Jews within various Islamic orders, but they have no love for these people. There's no love between any of these groups. How could they be? They're all psychotic. And so I'm more the kind of person who says, oh, they're fighting now? The two psychotic groups are about to kill each other off? Oh, shit, let's hurry over there with a couple of fire extinguishers and put it out. Are you kidding me? Break out the marshmallows and have a ball? Brilliant. Get out of the way. Oh, and if a bunch of extreme capitalistic corporate psychopaths like Wolfowitz and whoever else is piling over there to get involved, where they might stand being exposed to the public, I'm not getting in their way. I have love for none of these people. They want to butcher and murder each other, go ahead. Because our planet can be done with it then. Because we haven't talked about the religious, ideological front here, but to me it's all so occult nonsense. It's all burned the brain blind with light. It all has to go. And we cannot run governments on a pragmatic level. We have to take it back to some sort of morality, whether that's considered too aristocratic by the airheads and the culturalist bozos, too fucking bad, because we need it. We need a moral government. Because if you have moral people, then you should have a moral government. And if you have a moral government, you should have moral people. And when you don't have either of them, then it's a meltdown situation. And no amount of propping it up is going to help it. At the bottom of what it's all about, man is free, and therefore he needs to be free to be virtuous. If he's not free to be virtuous, then it doesn't matter what else he's free to do. And you can look around at the media and all the rest of the shit that's in our world and see that there's not much virtue there at all. And therefore, it is very important that we allow space for nature to move in, right? Like I said, the Plutonic light, to then excise, right? To do surgery and cut off all this dirty, rotten, infection, all of these cysts, all of this cancer. Something out of our hands does indeed occur to get rid of it. And what we need to do is stand back with reverence and realize it's moving in the world. It is the ultimate Holy Spirit in the sense that it is the will of man, the morality underneath, that just simply, it's an order that doesn't accept pestilence. It does it for a while, and then finally it moves in to deal with it. And we need to be very conscious of that. Let that action happen and not focus on a lot of the other issues that are going on, unless it's totally rational and justified. Like, I do stand against Islam, and I do it openly because, to me, there's no question about it, that the message of history and my own experiences show me that it is a pestilential thing. There are no moderates, really. People go, well, my dentist is a Muslim, he's a really nice guy. Of course he has to be. He has to wear a suit and tie. It's called stealth jihad. Have you no brain at all? But is he an artist? Is he a composer? Is he a musician? Is he an architect? Is he doing anything for your actual culture? Or is he just parasiting up the culture he found here? If he was back in his own country, where would he be? That's what you got to think about. He's not necessarily, he might be functioning, running a gas station or something, but that's all created by Western man. He didn't create it. And what is he really doing? No, nor am I saying that he should be killed or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But we've got to realize what we're dealing with here. And if these people that are so-called moderates are loath to condemn the extremists, then they need to be deported as well, as far as I'm concerned, because what you're doing is preserving culture. Now, the culturalist person cannot hear our words, so I don't talk to them. In fact, I never speak about these things to anyone, in the world. But I certainly wouldn't speak to somebody who was culture. If the only book on their table is what do you have over there, the TV Times, or what is it,
just like I guess the newspaper. Most people just, or the Reader's Digest or whatever.
Yeah, Yeah. Or that thing, where you look up what TV program you're going to be using.
Oh, yeah, just like the TV guide.
TV guide, right. So if that's all I saw on their shelf, right? Or Madonna's sex book, or something along those lines, right? The autobiography of Oprah Winfrey, fuck, what a classic, I'm going to go, right, here we are, sorry mate, but you're cultural fucking deviant, so we won't be talking about anything, that we're talking about right today. I'm not going to tell you to go over and read my Constitution Con article or what I think about current affairs, We'll just say, can you stick on the barbecue? I'm a vegetarian, you got any veggie burgers? No, we'll go out and get some then, come on. That's about the sum total of it. I'm not going to get into any of this other stuff because it is literally impossible for the person who's been drowned in parchment idolatry, drowned in some pap they've heard at the local church, or in some charity, or I go to the United Nations website, I'm checking out all this communitarian stuff. It's wonderful. Well, the people who are telling you to hug the world are the ancient destroyers of the world. Can you compute this? For 2,000 years, they've butchered untold millions. They have created an ideology that has given rise to a sixth extinction scenario in which you have no connection with nature. They butchered indigenous tribes. Their own financial orgs to this day play cat and mouse with these foreign, including the British Empire did it as well. But they play cat and mouse with the economies of these foreign countries so they can never come to solvency, so that you can guarantee that they'll have hatred towards the West when it's not the West who's done anything to them. And so on and so on. So for 2,000 years, this org out of Rome has done this. And you are now going to tell me that you have the solutions, and that anyone who comes to tell you any of this, it needs to be locked up, or the websites need to be shut down, or whatever else they threaten you with. You know what I mean? Yeah. But and then again, the final thing I'll say on solutions is, look, even if that happened to be the case, right, where you were personally compromised, Paul Joseph Watson recently was given death threats. If things like that comes to that level and say, well, you might end up being arrested, go ahead. Go ahead. You just arrested a complete set of encyclopedias. So the absolute last person that you want to be putting into a jail or any other place where there's a captive audience is me. Because if you arrest me, I'm Irish, mate, and I will turn that place into a bastion of truth in a couple of weeks. Because I know how to get into the psychology of all those other prisoners. I know what makes them tick. I can speak to them as they need to be spoken to, and I can show them the error of their ways better than any human being on this planet, and I can show them the bigger picture clearer than anybody on this planet, and therefore you do not want me in any kind of situation where I have access to a microphone, which is in that kind of a situation. So you know what they do? They just leave you alone. They bloody well better. Because that's one of the solutions, is be so up on this subject matter, be so fearless and articulate, that the last thing the establishment wants to do is give you any kind of publicity or put you in any kind of situation where you're talking with ordinary human beings, be they police or be there anyone else that you might be surrounded by.
That's right.
Because deep in the heart of every single human being, you see, is the knowledge that they've been had, the knowledge that there's been corruption on the levels of politics and religion, but they've not been able to articulate it. Most people know it, but they cannot articulate it. And even when they try to do so, they usually do it in a very impoverished and wrong-headed way. Like I said, the blacks against the whites, the Native American Indians against the American whites, or the guys over there against the capitalists, or whatever. It's all ineffectual. It's only true to a point. And that's where we basically come to up until the point of this alternative movement being created, even though some of the people, or most of the people still within this movement, need to brush up and not fall for those old hackneyed, outworn, ways of looking at the world. But it has happened. The new dimension, the new perception has happened, and that's why I did the Papacy article recently, is because now it is the time for people to digest who the main architects of control are, how they work, what their weaponry is, things like mental reservation, things like using these orgs that appear to be neutral, throwing money around with charities, and never ever for a moment imagine that these people are what they appear to be. And then knowing the history of how much they've undermined, and knowing that then, as we said in this interview, they're quite capable in this process of finally turning on those that they used and say, you're done. You're going no further. We're going on with the journey. We're taking all the food. We need it, so we're taking your water and all. You go, wait a minute, we carried all your boxes for you, we opened the jungle for you, we fought off all those wild beasts for you. Yeah, I know, guy, but, we don't need you anymore. We're going on, we want to go light. So that could be happening right now. And that means that Zionism could be downsized. Islam itself could be either downsized or even wiped out. It just depends what they're feeling on a different day. How far they want to go with this. And sure, that will mean more money for the West, but not for you and me. It's only for those people who have been running the West, running it as a system, who've been, as I said, responsible for the destruction, the subversion of authentic, again, not perfect, but authentic modes of government which have already been created. So while you were focused on your communism and other people focused on their Marxism and other people focused on some other Christian democracy or blah, 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 like a country like Sweden, they didn't know about other things. And any man in any culture, like Finland once used to know about these things. Finland was very much an ally of Germany, and that's because they were supremely anti-communist. You can't think of a more anti-communist country than Finland. And so, of course, they were always pro-German, weren't they? Yeah, but any of those German scholars, just like any of those Serbian scholars or Croatian scholars who knew what we're talking about, they were all wiped out. Their books are not published, so you're not going to read about them. And then people like me come along and go, well, you can't read those books because they're not translated, but you can read Avril Manhattan. His works are in English, and he was a friend of all those guys. If there's a guy who's unpublished in the world, Avril Manhattan knew about him personally, and he translated his books, or he put the content of those books into his books. Or a Eustace Mullins, or a G. Edward Griffin, or a Yuri Lina. Some people are really, high-end, top of the list, the ones you really need to read. And I know many others to boot. Some of the, like we'll put links below later on in the description, 2 or 3 books for people to read that really help to show you what I'm talking about. Because to sort of finish our conversation, I just say, don't believe me. There's nothing I'm saying that hasn't been researched. Both in real time and also through the 30 years of what I've been doing. Even going back into the 80s, a lot of this stuff was, especially about Germany, was of interest to me back then. I got my Germanophobia website, which is the result of nearly, I started researching, can you believe that, in 1976, between 1979. It was actually in a religious class in Belfast. In my religious class, we were told to do certain projects. Oh, really? And I was already realizing that what they were telling us about Nazi Germany was a pack of lies. And then very gradually from that time on, from watching all of these propagandist documentaries and then the films, the World at War, a whole colossal amount of media propaganda that came out and was constantly shown on British TV down through the war years and into the 70s. So I grew up amongst that, but I never believed one single word of it. But I did know a lot of it, and in my own way became pretty much an authority. And then later on, as I got more into the occult and started studying about German Freemasonry and German Ariosophy, which then led up to the Aryan movements, the negative Aryan movements, the pseudo-Aryan movements, and then got into studying things like German mysticism, German romanticism, German idealism, you name it, right? Then I started to see, what is going on here? Now I understand. And then when I came across these alliances that Germany was thinking of having so that it could immediately separate itself from its age-old true enemies, which is Britain and France, and their lackeys, and it nearly succeeded. And because it nearly succeeded, and because America was going to be tied in there, America's great future was an alliance with Germany that I then believe would have eventually brought in Slavic Russia. And then the Austro-Hungarian Empire is always follows. Where Germany goes at that time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was bound to follow. And then we would have had a world order that would have been absolutely different than the one that these rotten, disgusting, perfidious creatures, and that includes your Bushes, but also all the way back through your Thatchers and pretty much everyone, all the way back to Roosevelt and before even back to Teddy Roosevelt. The experiment went wrong, and this is demonstrably proven. So people need to go to my forum. They can read the articles. I've worked my fingers to the bone, to put it in writing, and also interviews and what have you. So every single thing I'm saying is backed up. If after reading all of that stuff you go, no, I think you're wrong, hey, I'm with you. Okay, go ahead, you have the perfect right. But you have no right to call me a bigot or a racist or, a prejudiced person without knowing where I'm coming from. Because on these interviews and even in other podcasts, I have to abbreviate, don't I? On Facebook, we're abbreviating. I'm doing a million things during the day. So if I go to type something in on Facebook, that's just a tiny little sentence, a little abbreviation. How could you possibly hold me to what I just said there? Of course it's not in context. Of course it might be sounding contradictory to something I've written before. But that's not me. That's just the World Wide Web. That's just the medium itself doing that. Everybody else does it too. So the only way to really take on to be our true critic, not a cynic, is to go and research everything that this man, he's in the public eye, he's speaking all the time, he's got these crazy ideas, he's bringing up all these thoughts, he's talking about history. I'm going to go and verify it. I'm going to go and check it out and read that material myself, and there's a good chance that I'll agree, but even if I don't, well, then you've got Tsarion's approval, because he goes, yeah, come up with another theory then. Because at the end of the day, this is my subjective understanding of history. I have a lot of insider, experience. And I say a lot, meaning a lot. It was really something to grow up the way I did. And a lot of that has come out of seeing all of these rival groups, both Protestant groups in Ireland, both Republican groups in Ireland, both socialists, Republicans, extremists, all sorts of anarchists, and then other aspects of my cultural and family background, letting me have a very, very good view of all of these things. Like, didn't you say yourself you worked in politics with a leading politician in who was it you mentioned?
It was Paul Hellyer, yeah. He's like over his 90s now, but he was one of the longest standing politicians here in Canada, and he kind of witnessed what happened here to destroy this country.
Yeah, and that's second to none. That experience that you had is second to none, and that means that you have certain standing, you have wisdom, you have understanding. See, they need that. The average bozo who's just sitting on his couch, flicking through the channels, we're not them. We don't want to be them. We want to celebrate the fact that we've read the Ralph Epperstons, and we know about the Federal Reserve, and we know about it, and we're continuing. We're not perfect because we're continuing in our own research, but when we deign to put something out there on the World Wide Web, that's an act of bravery, and it's an act of intelligence, because that as long as intelligence reigns, as long as there is freedom and intuition and reason, and there is, then of course you've got to do what you have to do. You just can't sit at home and shiver under the staircase.
I can't live with myself, just, experiencing what I've experienced, learning what I've learned, having the opportunity to speak with the people I've spoken with, to just sit down now, especially now that I'm a father in this world, and I've been raised in something like martial arts, which is designed to give you a spine in life, and to stand up against tyranny and injustice against people who have no idea what the hell is coming down. There's no friggin' way in hell I can just sit on my ass and just go, okay, well, I'll just let you guys think what you want and do what you want. And I'm not sitting here saying I know, what I know is a fraction of what there is to be known. I'm still learning from many of the greats and doing my own research. But I echo what you're saying, Michael, because what I'm doing here and what I've always done is come from a place of a passionate response to this and saying, look, we need to figure this shit out. You don't have to agree with me, and maybe one day I'm going to change my mind on certain things and then come back to something else, and everybody's like, oh, you're contradicting yourself there. Well, it's a learning process, so that's part of it. And I'm here from a passion of wanting to see intelligence and justice and truth and proper harmony brought back in, proper order aligned with the natural order. I don't want to see this disgusting shit taking place again and again and again around the world, and us repeating the same cycle. So you're damn right I'm going to start talking about it and voicing my opinion. And I agree with you, it takes a lot of courage, but it's something that definitely has to be done. And I don't see this kind of courage from a lot of these trolls on the internet who just run around and comment on people's pages without a clue, and who don't produce work themselves. Half these guys have like 0 subscribers and no video history or no documented books or writings or anything, or any kind of attempt whatsoever. They're just running around critiquing other people's work. So I don't know. I think that if you're out there watching what's going on and you think you're just going to sit by and watch it, that's just not the kind of cloth that I'm cut from. So I totally echo what you're saying there, Michael.
And I have friends that I don't need to look out any further to internet trolls. I've got people, are closer than that, and they're pig ignorant as well. You talk to them on these matters, and they think they just can't get around it because they know nothing, and I can see that they know nothing. So I don't need any worldly people I don't know to show me, how much I do know and how long the journey has been. I just need to look at the productions and mentality of people that are, on a closer level to see how utterly ridiculously shallow they are. I don't get into changing their ways, but I do observe it and see what you're talking about is perfect carry on to what we're talking about. We've been speaking about culture all the way through this interview. Yeah, but culture is not just a passive thing we've been describing, where you're just a passive inheritor of cultural motifs and cultural tropes, down from the past. The really cultural man is one who adds to his culture. So as you, as a teacher of martial arts, you are emboldening and continuing to develop the culture of people that have now passed. I do the same thing in my work, and even a good artist does the same thing, a poet, a sculptor, an architect, an industrialist. You're carrying on, a musician, you're carrying on the tradition, so you're actually active in culture. Now, if you are active in culture, you have the perfect right to defend it in whatever way you want, and no one has the right to contradict you. You have the right, because you're cultural. So one of the things that we've lost in this world is that moral high ground. I call it being morally superior, because the opposite is what's known as a constitutional psychological inferior, and believe me, the world and the internet is full of them. And therefore they will want to, out of envy or jealousy or whatever, or just pig ignorance, or again, they could be even agents, come after you to try and find your weak spots, or just, it's usually not even that, it's just usually complete slur, it's complete diatribe, it's complete a character assassination and so on. But they have no right, because the cultural man has the right. If you're doing something to not just passively accept the culture, and even that is still good, by the way. If you're nothing more than just a receptacle for the culture, the great movies, the great art, you are aware of it. So you don't have to be really super conscious of it, because you're in the ambience of it. And if I was to sit with anybody, I go, so what kind of art do you like? Oh, I really like the French Impressionists. How do you even say that? You say, oh, I like Beethoven, like in the Clockwork Orange, at least he liked Beethoven. So it's like, that's a cultural person to that degree. You have culture around you, you take it for granted. But the next step up is the man who actually contributes to his culture through articles, through films, through whatever it is. And then that person, whether others like it or not, does have the right, because he's got that extra few stripes. Because in order to create culture, he's been involved in the only process that matters on this planet. Because the real process has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. That's an anti-process. Right? The cultural man is involved in the actual thing and the only thing that matters, which is culture. And therefore, he then, as that man, is a full man. And doesn't even mean if he's wrong or right in other areas in what he's doing. That's a second thing to look at. But because he's involved in the culture, he is already given a certain badge of approval, a certain right to come in and say, no, this is what I believe. But you see, unfortunately, that leaves out 90% of the people you and I have to deal with on a daily basis. So from the time, say, I started, which was technically in 98, but it became more like, I was still on TV in 98. So when I first came online in 98, from that point, I've had to deal with people who've been culturalists. People who've even fallen away. I mean, you go through whole generations of these idiots. And the one thing I've always known is that they don't matter. It's like why James Dio, when he came on Black Sabbath, when he was the first singer after Ozzy, and most of the crowd would be giving him the finger, and a lot of them would even bring signs to say, you're an asshole, you do off, you this, you that. And Dio said, yeah, I'd never give him any thought because I'm on stage, you're not.
Right.
He was just able to summarize it. Said, I am, I've got my statement of higher value. I'm here doing what I'm doing, and I know that it's reaching the world. And he was absolutely 100% correct. So all these people who usually are bashing you are culturalists. They're one level above the monkey. And maybe even that's too good. But the internet has given them this perfect megaphone to be able to blast and scream and get their own frustrations out as they sit in some little hovel in Wolverhampton or wherever the hell it is, or Southern Ireland or whatever, sitting there tapping away, just throwing dust and making a noise and ranting. Little worms, little wannabes, little thieves. These are not the people we need to listen to, and they will have no say. So we have to just continue. And continue, one, with being a cultural person. Don't let them put you off. Continue to write, continue to think, continue to produce fantastic stuff. Doesn't mean it's all perfect. Doesn't mean there's not error within it. But that's, as you said, it's a process. You keep on going. And then as a cultural person, start to wear that badge, brightly, polish it. Go, yeah, I've got a right to stand up and say, here's my comments on, religion. Here's my comments on, culture. And that's what good journalists do. That's what good writers and thinkers and critics of society do. The cynic is a little maggot, a little jealous, envious creature who it's very obvious to see their motives. It's very obvious to see how they've magpied from other people and done it very, very blasé. The world is full of people like that.
They've lost connection to their own inner light, their own inner intelligence. They've shut that off completely, and then they, like we've spoken about in the psychic vampirism work, they try to steal it from others.
That's right. And even though I've written on it myself, and I'm not a psychic vampire, but the person who's usually the most up on that subject is an energy vampire, which is a strange paradox I pointed out. So it's just like all detectives know that usually, a detective can make the best criminal. There are these strange quirks, but also a criminal can also pretend to be the most innocent because he's the criminal. So you have all these paradoxes, and therefore, if you let these kinds of people, throw you off or deter you or whatever, it's no good. Keep your eyes on the cultural aspects that have enriched you, and continue to try in your own way, as perfect as can be, without a lot of self-sadism, without a lot of self-criticism. Can't carry on and work slowly to perfecting. And you work with a body, so you would know more than any intellectual even how important practice is. It's important intellectually, but it's the person who works with a body who really knows that if you turn it off, you're dead. If you keep going, there is indeed a thing called perfection. Isn't that true?
Exactly. That is so important. I think we have to understand the intelligence of the body and how it works with your mental processes, how it helps you have a clearer state of mind, understanding the importance of health in your life. A lot of the people that I speak to, they might be up on certain parts, but they're very unaware of what their body is, and they actually almost demonize their own body. Everybody's so self-critical of their body, and they're so afraid and so shy, all the time physically, because of all the mind control or whatever's out there in the media, that they have no connection to it, and they're actually missing a huge piece of the puzzle. And so I absolutely believe, get your chi flowing, get your energy flowing, get moving, find something that's right for you. For me, it was martial arts, but for you, it could be anything. And then that way you're going to start to actually become educated, because you're working with nature itself. You're working with the vehicle that you have to express your consciousness here in this world, and by doing that, your consciousness and your true imperial self will shine through more, because you're able to have a good metaphor in front of you every single day that's referencing these higher truths, and that's really what I see through these physical practices. So absolutely,
I agree wholeheartedly with that. It teaches you things that just by thinking mentally, and feeling, that's only part of it. You've got to get that body moving. I mean, I do it out of revenge, actually. I'm a very strange kind of bird. I do it for revenge of all those years I had to sit in the cubicle or in the classroom, in that Pink Floyd Bastille, where your body was, unlike in Steiner or Krishnamurti school, where they never allow you to do that. They get you out and they have a whole bunch of different ways that they get the kids to, negotiate uneven ground, walk on bare feet, work on those children's apparatus, where you'd find in an average, I don't know what they're
like
called.
A jungle gym or whatever. Or
exactly.
Or something.
Yeah, exactly. To get into I never went to one of those schools, so I was very envious of it. But I believe in the physical because of that it's revenge on those people who forced your somatic intelligence to be constrained, as you said, shackled, and sit there while they're force feeding your brain, but your body is uncoordinated, and then you do start hating it. Then if it's too flabby or you get too many pimples or whatever, and then what happens in Irish schools, probably in Britain as well, in America, is other kids would then pick on, the ugly ones or the fat ones or the weird ones, right? And so if you didn't have body hate to begin with, because you didn't have that in your home life, well, you're certainly going to have it by the time you've gone through school, because the other kids are just going to rag you to death, because you weren't able to run as fast or whatever. So this was, a key area in which not only constraining the physical energy of the body is lethal, it's absolutely diabolical. And it starts from the moment that you enter into the kindergarten or even the primary school. So one has to take revenge. I mean, I'm telling people right now, you need to avenge yourself on that level, that your parents forced you to do that, the teachers did. And so Qigong and martial arts and Aikido, even in the early stages of Aikido for people, is very, very good, because it is literally it's giving the body that sigh of relief that it's wanted all those years. And it will help to dissipate the waves and waves of self-hatred, which is bringing us down. That self-hatred, again, we didn't talk about it in this interview, but that self-hatred is the hatred that the big brother co-ops. So again, solutions, physical movement, because it introduces you to the body, helps you get rid of your self-hate, and then you've just uninstalled from yourself one of the key things by which all tyrannical edifices, control you by. Not just the ancient trauma, that's their main focus, but your topical ontogenetic, meaning in this life, your waves and waves of I'm not tall enough, I'm not intellectual enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not this enough.
Right.
You know, all that, I'm not fast runner enough, whatever it might be, I'm not wealthy enough. All the waves and waves of self-violence that we do to ourselves can be one by one cancelled. And so the person who commits ritually, not just because they got nothing better to do, I'll go join the martial arts club around the corner, you know, but if they come there willfully to know, I understand the purpose of why I'm doing this, then they're committed. And, you know, the teacher and they have a rapport then because there's actually an agenda now, there's an objective to reach. You know, and so for me, it was always a matter of vengeance. I'm not going to let those ones who's tied my body down, who constricted my somatic energy, you know, and as I'm showing in this latest Path of the Fool episode, the Hermit, through the work of Wilhelm Reich, shadow work is actually body work. This is what they've all missed. All these fake writers and teachers trying to talk about Jung's shadow. They have never read Reich, so they don't know dick. They don't know that the shadow is actually the body. Okay, I agree that the shadow can be other things theoretically, but what it really is in its most pragmatic version is what Wilhelm Reich knew. It's the energy and the bioenergy contained within the body. And if that's not moving, then you don't have intelligence. You just got this hot thing in your skull called the brain, and you have the idea that that is intelligence. But intelligence is something far, far more incorporealized and fleshy and real. And so that is one of the big solutions of our world, is to get people out into the Tai Chis, you know. Eventually, like Bruce Lee, they can come up with their own thing. And even if they don't go to a formal class, I recommend that they do start synthesizing, you know, or bringing together different disciplines and make up something of your own. But if you do have the inclination to get out and meet people as well, it's great to go and do martial arts and things like that, because it will be incredibly healing, not just on a physical healing point of view, but on a psychic healing point of view, and also on this conspiratorial level. You coming more to your center. And so the big brother has less power over you. You become like a warrior. You know, it's like your own term that you use for yourself, truth warrior. That's exactly how I say it is as well.
Well, thank you for that, because this is actually the whole thesis that I'm trying to put together myself. It's what I've been feeling for a long time and just never maybe found the right context or the right words or the right timing until now at this stage in my life. And, you know, I'm actually going to be also debunking a lot of the bullshit that's encoded in the martial art community as I see it, because it's also been turned into a lot of dogmas and a lot of, you know, Bruce Lee spoke a lot about this, about these fixed patterns and getting everybody through repetition and doing all these things. And you lose that freedom of expression and that freedom of being, which is the whole point of this. And, you know, using the conflict or using the fact that, you know, you're training an art of combat as a metaphor for your life so that you're combating those negative forces that you have within you, the doubt, the fear, the trauma. You're combating this long-lived trauma that we've got within us. You know, it's acting in very much the same way that yoga, the real yoga, was supposed to be used as a way of healing these things. So I've used it so many ways with children, especially, and I've seen the most bullied, picked on, you know, shadow of a self kid come in and turn into what I would consider a warrior, absolutely, and actually come in and start bringing the bullies in to sign up for the class, and then starting to turn them and make change in their lives, you know. So this is the true. This is just, and there's many other ways, you know. There's many other ways of doing it, but I personally like martial arts because, and especially in the context in which we're talking, because we are in a great war. Because we're really trying to sharpen people's metal again and get them in touch with their inner power and get them in touch with their capabilities and boost their confidence. I mean, you can't get into these kinds of subjects if you have no confidence and no inner knowing of who you are. You won't survive the journey. And I see it's happened to so many people in this alternative movement where they just didn't have that good inner constitution within themselves, so they couldn't go past a certain point. And I think that's why this sort of idea needs to come out now, because it's a tremendous way to help bring that empowerment that's going to come, that will help then lead people to that greater knowledge.
You're totally right. And remember that self-esteem, or I call it the statement of higher value, that is not mentally, it's only partly mentally established. You have to do it through the body as well. You have to do it, as I said, as part of culture, like you were talking about the kid becoming, you've just introduced him, he's not just been introduced into martial arts, he's been introduced to his culture.
Right.
Or to a culture, and that is what inspires, because you become a being by being born, right? Your biology makes you a being, but the culture makes you a self. So a person cannot even find their statement of higher value, their self-esteem, you can read self-esteem books all day long, and it's very good that you should. Nathaniel Branden, other people that talk, but that's just reading. That's for the mind. Then now you can grasp the concept. How you actually really activate it is through the body. Another thing that happens with that as well is not just the shadow work, but the idea that how could you possibly be fighting Big Brother when you're getting fat and flabby on their food, on their drink, on their smokes, on just basically on their culture? You're in their culture. You're imbibing their culture. How can you get back to nature when you're living on the dead animals and things like that? So there's a whole ethos here to be taken on board, and the person who works with the body slowly starts to purge, from the conditioning also. That the less aware people are involved in, and they will end up, first of all, they're in the culture of the establishment, and they're going to end up more in it because they're going to end up taking the pharmaceutical drugs to ease their pain, and then finally they're going to end up, a big pharma in a situation in which the doctor or the hospital is taking care of them because they have no knowledge of their body. They're not even aware of why the body might even be ill, and also then they have to endure the agony and pain because they didn't look after the body, and the body's reaction to that will be, hey, there's going to be cancer, there's going to be all sorts of ill health. I agree that in certain people's cases that can be inflicted. Some of your ailments are not your cause. They were inflicted through stress and trauma by other evil people in your family and around you, for sure, and you have to deal with that. But in the most part, people have lived a very decadent life and they've had choices, and they simply think of the body as merely a vehicle, as you say, something to denigrate, something to compare with some other, pop hero or imbecile airhead, that the media has thrown up. But, those people are totally, utterly neurotic. So what are you comparing yourselves with them for? It's crazy. So yeah, it's partly also this deprogramming. These martial arts and things help you deprogram from the beast, which wants to keep you fluoridated, mercuryized, whatever way you look at it, but eating the white bread and the sugar and all of that stuff. People have to, if not cut that out, then at least massively downsize it so that then they can be a good model to any kids that are around them. A kid walks into your house and he sees a weight training setup or some freaking samurai swords. Yep, friend for life.
Exactly.
If I seen a throwing star, right, and it's somebody, because in London when we lived as a child, a lot of people wear black belts and stuff. See if I ever even seen a throwing star. That was it. I wanted to never leave.
Exactly. It's like it was something that captured me at a young age as well. And I think when I see that, I can tell the kids that are sort of forced into my class, they're just their parents just bring them in, plop them down and go turn them into something. And then there's all those other kids that, they come in with this light in their eyes. That's like, oh my God, I have to do this. This is just amazing. And once they catch on to it, you'd be surprised how you can turn like the most feeble looking, scrawny kid into a black belt that's out there winning gold medals and just shining like unbelievably. And it was all had to do with changing their mindset and inspiring them, just like you said. If you can pass on that torch of inspiration, man, you've made it contagious. You've brought out something good in that person. The healthy aspects of who they are will start to come out naturally. They just sometimes today, these kids, they're so absorbed in this anti-culture that's called culture that they don't have a reference point. They don't have role models anymore. They're very few and far between, especially from the parent level right up to whatever they're throwing out on the media or the school teachers or whatever. Now if you can just a little bit shine that light to them, especially with these young kids when their minds are just starting to form, then you're already doing humanity in this world a great service.
Yeah, and you can do it one by one. You see, the cultural aspect, healing the world isn't doing it in a grandiose way. It's the little martial art Taoist guy who just had a little backyard and he saw 4 or 5 people. That's changing the world.
Yeah,
it changed me. I was into Bruce Lee. When I was young, I was into the martial arts movies. Like The Word of Margin, which is a show that used to be shown in the 70s here. Old martial arts mania.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And anything like Monkey. All these different stories. And the mobility, because I actually believe that when people are talking about magic, martial arts is magic. Aikido, to me, is magic.
It is. It actually, Aikido is just talking about energy, moving energy, how to understand energy. And what are we talking about when we say energy? We're talking about that positive force, that magic.
But the movement, even the movements are magical. So that to me is magic. I don't look at it as being something supernatural. Magic and miracle is the movement of the body, in this constructive way where you're dealing with a life force. And of course, it's not just what people think is overcoming an enemy. It's all the other things we've just been talking about freeing yourself from any kind of control, being psychically immune. But it can be done mentally to a degree. It has to be done bodily. I'm now thinking back on, my uncle did know a couple of guys. They're from the East, but there was one Malaysian guy, I think, and one guy was like half Chinese or something like that, and they were martial arts. So just talking about it reminded me, I think the most hypnotizing thing I'd ever seen, the thing I loved beyond, was guitar. When I ever saw a guitar or had a chance to touch one, that was the most hypnotizing thing for me. But second to that was definitely, things connected to the martial arts. It was just incredible. And the whole idea that also, even in the act of combat, there's an integrity with the enemy. There's a common ground also.
Yeah, I've trained with many of some of my best friends, and we've had some of the most glorious wars together. And we look at each other as something that's going to sharpen each other's blade. Mm-hmm. Everybody comes in the dojo and they go, "Oh, you're beating up your friends, and what are you doing?" And it's just violence. And I'm like, no, you're ignorant. You don't understand. There's a communication happening between two warriors. That's a totally different ballgame. Nobody's getting killed here. Nobody's enacting violence. Violence means violation. That's the thug on the street that's coming up to violate your sovereignty, and you need to know how to deal with that. But when you're talking about two warriors coming together to play the instrument of the body and work on it like a chess match, that's like looking at two chess masters and you're like, oh, you're beating each other up. You're so violent. It's a total misunderstanding of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And they don't have the ones who are the thug version. I talk about in the Hermit, somatic dissociation, where parts of the body are numb, cold to the touch. People don't even realize this. So the thug is the person who's not comfortable in his body, whereas the martial artist is the one who's mastered his body. The temperature of his body is balanced. His homeostasis is balanced. He can stand for many hours. He can endure. And he can also, through the process you're talking about, get to know another person just with a glance of the eyes or the subtlest of body language, whereas the thug, you see, he can't read any of that. He's basically dissociated in that as well. So the community is what you're talking about. It's not an act of violence. It's actually getting to know yourself through another, so that even the slightest look or the slightest gesture, and even sometimes even without those things, from even looking at a person just as they're sitting still or walking, you can tell what's on their mind. You can tell by looking at a photograph, what this person's going to do, or what level they're on, what mentality they're on, this kind of thing. All of these subtle senses that are not part of the five senses, but they're something deeper intuitions, deeper of the core self. But you can't even get to that level if you yourself are not only psychically dissociated, because we always think of mental illness being that exactly what I just said, mental. No. Long before you get the mental illness, you have to have somatic illness, meaning parts of your body don't exist. And then when you have an injury, right? When you have an injury of something like, a girlfriend once, she had a very bad foot injury and it persisted for years. She got it like skiing or something, but it turned out to be a persistent. Yeah, why? Because that's that part of the body calling to you for some other reason. And so you had the accident because there's something relating to that part of the body that got dissociated. Or a spine, or even a more serious injury. It will bug you, right? Because that's that part of the body trying to address itself to you. You didn't listen, so now it's going to have to be cut or injured or have some other, dystrophy attached to it until you give it love, until you go there and, take focus on your body again. But you can't even do that if your ethos, if your culture is completely saturated with your popcorn and your video game. The kids that see, like some of the kids that come into your dojo, right? They don't know their body. They know video games. If they're going to kill and do martial arts, it's through some digital, these video games, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So what they're doing is taking them out of the video game and saying, no, do you realize you have a body? Stop moving that man around, that virtual man, and, do it yourself.
It's better when you do it yourself. I mean, you're in the video. You are the video game. You're already in one.
Yes, but the difference is that on the video game, your mind can go crazy into the character. When you're having to do it with your own body, a different morality is involved because now you have to actually sweat and blood So your attitude is different to whom you're killing and whom you're engaging. If it's just a video game, then all the sadistic, pornographic stuff can come forth unabated.
Exactly.
Because it's just a video game and the guy dies, he's just a digital gelf. If it's you in combat, there's real fear, there's real attack, there's real feeling of pride if you win. There's all sorts of other mechanisms of the body and mind that stop the person being pathological. You know what I mean?
Right, it's true. And the last point I would make about that would be that when I just had a conversation with a parent of one of the kids, and they're like, well, you're showing them all these moves of combat, like they're going to go to school and they're going to start doing this on their friends. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. They actually need something to vent and to express this energy through. It's not a negative thing at all. It's just become negative because there's a repression of it. And what happens is that they actually learn that they're not the only ones that get to do that hip toss or that, punch or kick or that Aikido move or whatever. Their partner gets to do it back on them right away. So they're actually learning that they're learning control. They're learning that, if I do that too hard, that actually hurts because I've had that done to me before. They understand, there's moments of victory, moments of defeat, moments of success, moments of failure. And they start to really get used to the flow of how life works. So they do need to get a couple knocks around the side of the head once in a while. They do need to get out there and be a little bit, in a positive, competitive atmosphere with their friends where they're just trying to bring out the best in themselves. And by doing that, you're not getting, I've seen it 100% of the time. I don't have parents coming back really and saying, oh, my kid's out there beating people up because you're teaching them how to fight. I see the opposite. I see these kids becoming like the shining light in their schools where they're actually being role models and everybody wants to be like them because they're walking around with a sense of confidence that says, I don't need to mess with you. You don't even know how to fight. If I want a good fight, I'm going to go to the dojo tonight and do it with one of my friends who knows exactly what he's doing. And it's a totally different dynamic. And, it definitely relates to everything we've been discussing.
And think what will happen when that kid realizes he's a defender of those who are being picked on by some loathsome bully.
Yeah,
now he can
exactly.
Just grab his hand and break his finger and go, you'll never see that guy again.
Exactly.
That guy will never be, he'll cross the street when he sees us coming. That is a very, very tall thing, you see.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, it really is. And so I'm a huge, huge believer in that. It's very needed. And remember, just as we use words to communicate in language, people forget there's a language of the body. The moves in martial arts and Tai Chi and stuff like that is a language. It's ABCs. It's an alphabet, but it's a language because people say, well, you keep on talking about all these other sensory inputs to the brain and all. Don't understand any of this. There's only 5 senses. No, there isn't. Just like there's not one alphabet or one language. The body's movements is an expression, is an art form, is an actual language communicating in the way that animals or birds, right? Because even our physical language, the one that is with words, derived from bird song and from animal song. This is a fact. The Gerald Massey's and so many other people have proven this beyond doubt. But your movements of your body are equally responses, equally forms of communication. But if you don't open them up, then your arms, your fingers, your legs, your body, your torso, your head, all of the meridians, all of the pressure points, they don't get to speak. And do you know the consequences of it? They're equally as bad as if you were, muffled. You were a person who could speak, but somebody put a muzzle on you and you had to go through the years never speaking. Well, it's the same thing you do when you muzzle the body. It is going to react to not just stiffness, but insomnia and aggression and frustration and build up and build up and build up. Then Big Brother is, like I said, it hands you a culture of foods and suppressants, video games, which you can then vicariously butcher whoever you want. And so the thing becomes pathological. So I talk to parents like you do and I say, look, the reason why this client or this person may go and do this wrong or whatever is because you see they're in a culture that is wrong. They're not broken. And what I'm going to do with them in this reading or with this chart is we're going to try and work on it to see how they can get out of that broken system creatively and proactively and using their numbers and finding out who they are with their astrology, because those are like tools. They're like weapons. When you understand what armaments you've got psychically, what are your key numbers, what your planets work with you, this year, maybe different the next year. But when you know what you've got in your Aladdin's cave, your armory, then you can say, oh, this year I'm not meant to work with a spear. I'm meant to work with a club. I'm not meant to come at people in the front. I'm meant to, attack them from behind. Or now I'm meant to be totally defensive. Or now I'm meant to be completely passive and neutral. All of this is vital. But basically, the body's movements physically is a form of communication. And when you open up that communication, other deeper parts of the ancestral brain open up that are deeper than the senses 5. They undergird the senses 5. And if that strata subconscious strata is silent, then your five senses, even though they may be operating enough for you to think, well, they're working, what are you talking about? No, they're not working. They're not working at full pranic level. So therefore, then if they're not working at full pranic level, how can your perception of the world around you or other people around you be clear and clean? How can you be clairvoyant? To be clairvoyant is not to sharpen the five senses from the top. It's to get down deep into the medulla and get down into the, past the limbic brain, right down into the spinal intelligence and awaken that, which is a kind of an animalistic thing, which is why Hatha Yoga, right, the scorpion movements and all these movements were based on animals. You think that because they were stupid? It's because they understood that there's a part of our brain. And every culture had this, where you work with the animal totems, and you work with the martial arts, and you work with the serpent energy, right, the kundalini, all of that, to get back, not later as it was made into the priests, which is all in the head, right, but the original Hatha Yoga, the original martial arts wasn't about kundalini as it's been explained today, where energy is descending from above. This is a lie. This is fiction. This is mysteria. Energy doesn't come from above any place. It comes from the core within to the surface within.
Right. And
back. Just like it is when you go to sleep. Why do you feel sleepy? Because something flags, energy recedes to the core, and you start feeling drowsy, and you'll even fall over if you don't go to bed. And then when you wake up in the morning, is some energy descending from above, some crown chakra? Bullshit. Right? It's moved from the crown chakra, but it's not where you think it is. That's all that priest shit of ups and downs and aboves and belows and slaves and masters. But the man who's free, who knows, I am my slave and master. I know what heaven and hell is, what diabolos and what God are. God is my core, and the so-called Satan, after the maniacs stopped talking about it, is just the surface. It's the ego that faces the world, that has to learn from worldly experience. But I have a core reservoir that is accumulated over the years. And the communication between those two hemispheres must not be armored, like Reich is saying. They have to be fluid. And there's only one way to get it fluid. The mind can't do it. You have to move. You've got to get the body moving. And you have to do it, and just running around the track isn't going to do it. Playing handball, I mean, every member of parliament goes to swat a fucking, squash ball about, but that's not what I'm talking about. It has to be intentional. It has to be intentionalized that you're doing this ritualistically, that you're doing it for purposes. In the beginning, you may not completely understand what it is, but as you go and start reading more of the literature and using these great men of Bruce Lee, as mentors, and even the greater ones behind him, and the great Aikido masters, you get it. And when I watch the Water Margin, or I was Monkey, or watch Chuck Norris, or Steven Seagal, or any of these guys, that's what I was looking at. Yeah, I admired the fact that they could overcome an enemy, but I was looking at what it means to be manly, to be like, oh my God, what the hell is this shit? This is
exactly. Yeah.
Right? But this is like the silent flute. This is like shit. And this to me was deeply, deeply spiritual. Deeply spiritual. And as I learned more and more about it, I've just simply built on that knowledge, built on it to understand its absolute preciousness. And if I had my time to start over again, or if I was back in a world teaching children again, Jesus, it would be the somatic. I would be bringing in somebody like you right away. I'd be saying, yeah, I got stuff to talk to you, but we're going to do that bit later. And I would do the Steiner thing. I would get the kids out in the morning and be working with the body energies, and only after the puff, they've had they're like almost sweating with adrenaline at that point, when there's a natural need for repose now. So going into the classroom, sitting down, stretching out, feeling the body. And now when there is this moment of repose, then an intellectual type of direction can begin. And even then, it has to be of a certain kind, which Steiner and Krishnamurti knew. It can't be authoritarian. It has to include, and it has to be curious, and it has to be rebuttal, and it has to be argumentative, and all of that. Even then, there's a certain way to do that. But my God, even besides that, the body must move, because I feel that we should all be wanting revenge on the sometimes up to 15 years of chronic caging and negation of the bodily energy. We went into this in the hermit, and we get into the hangman, it'll be even more, because that's what that guy's trying to do. He's going to go, it's all over, mate. I'm not, I disagree with the stasis of the body. And once I'm into that, then I know I'm making a prana move on many levels And that creates a deeper sense of clairvoyance, a bodily clairvoyance. It's not really of the senses at all. It's a sort of sixth, seventh, and eighth sense, because the body itself, these underlying areas of consciousness have become awakened, and they will help them to widen, as Blake said, right? They break the, how did he describe it? It's like, a river with the banks. They flood over. It floods over, and the senses are blasted open into a greater sense of vision. And he was a very, very fiery person. He was like a kind of an Aries. He was actually born in Sagittarius. Very fiery person. So I know that for him, walking and bodily exercise was extremely important. But it has to be with intention. Obviously, you're aware of that. It can't just be swatting balls around.
No, it can't be forced, like you said. It has to be you got to create an environment where that natural exuberance and that natural energy wants to flow, and you're just directing and working with the flow and learning about it. If you're trying to force things like what they do in schools, is force these kids to sit down, sit still, or we're going to smack you with a ruler or whatever. There's no reason nobody's learning anything, or that's the reason nobody's learning anything, is because the mind is not and the body's not primed to learn something, and they just can't say, "Oh, we have a 45-minute gym class, every couple of days or whatever." That's not enough. I totally agree. It's got to be hands-on. It's got to be a combination of things, and it can't be forced at all. Yeah,
there was we had several gyms. Physical culture has been big in Ireland. But I was so poor I couldn't afford it, so we'd go and sneak into the gym and just watch the martial arts. We knew the teacher because we had gone down to ask him about signing on, but it was always too costly, so we just sit on the balcony to watch the moves. And you can learn a lot just from just watching and then doing it yourself, the punch bag or some of the basic exercises kind of thing. And so that's how I learned the basic Qigong. Later I had to go back to the net and brush up on it, but basic, not Qigong, it was a basic Aikido, because the warm-up exercises of Aikido, those are absolutely top-notch. And so you could learn most of what was really needed just by watching these guys. We didn't have the money to pay for it, and, no way. We couldn't even afford to bus money down to the freaking leisure center, but at least we could watch how they did it and then go home and, do it ourselves. And then watching, all the kung fu stuff, you can't imagine how big, I don't know if you know in Ireland how big, Fu Manchu and all that, back in the 70s, the kids were absolutely obsessed. They put the bands around their head and run huge gangs of these kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely running riot. It was one of the biggest things, bigger than skateboards, bigger than breakdancing. It was Fu Manchu and the hordes of, martial art warmongering and stuff like that, and all sorts of programs like that where people were obsessed back in Ireland, It was a very strange thing to see, But there they were all dressed up in black with their red headbands,
Oh, I can imagine.
Chopping everybody, and so martial arts has had a huge, huge part in people around us. It's just, if you couldn't participate in it because, money wasn't there, then, you still would watch the shows and go down to the leisure centre, look through the window and see what they're doing, All the middle class guys, be able to pay for these long classes, and especially kung fu and things like that were very expensive because they're so lengthy. The classes go on, and
yeah,
they're very, 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 very. Jiu-jitsu, I'm thinking more. That was more intense, and it was more pricey because only a certain amount of people could commit to regimens of that kind and stuff. And in those days, in the 70s, there wasn't more free, cheap classes. There wasn't that. Yeah. You had to commit to a teacher who was much more stringent and much more, like a dictator, and they wanted their weight in gold, for you to join the club and all that stuff. And there was just no way. As I said, I couldn't even afford the bus fares down to these particular gyms. And so it was impossible. So you had to pick it up in other ways. But it was a lifelong interest. And then finally, when I realized the spiritual aspects of it are equally dominant, it continued. So I have a great admiration, for what you're doing. And I'm a big advocate of it. I think that much, much more important than some of the intellectual stuff. That's important too. But the children, the political systems, the way we're moving forward, it's only going to happen when the soma, the body itself, is incorporated. And then when the body's exhausted, in a positive way, healthy way, then comes a moment where there's a receptivity, and it's at that point then that a teaching of an intellectual mode, comes to play. So maybe we can get into that in other interviews, but I'm gonna have to go get something to eat right now. But that's a very, very important aspect of all of this as well.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, and well said. And we'll definitely do some more on it. working on producing my own work. For those listening, I finally got my new site up. It's called wayofthetruthwarrior.com. I'm going to be adding all kinds of commentaries and articles and information for you. There's already a lot of stuff there already to get people started, just so they can understand the philosophy behind this. And I'm trying to build this in the context of what's happening in the world and the whole importance of being aware and becoming a martial artist in life, and how we can utilize this great body of knowledge, just like you've done with your work, Michael. I look up to you and what you've done, and you've inspired me to try to bring forward what I have to offer and what I've spent my life studying. And you've actually brought out a lot of amazing points that many martial artists would never even know. Even though they might be masters of the physical arts, they're missing out completely. So we're trying to tie this all back together, bring it up to the fore, and provide solutions for people. So we'll wrap this interview up today with that. I think it's a good positive note to finish with, and everybody can go and check out the sources and the links we're going to provide in this video. And I also look forward to the upcoming show we're going to be doing on the Hermit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We'll do that next week because there's, again, even in 3 hours we couldn't get into everything, so there'll be really a lot of brilliant points to get into from that.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks, Michael, for your time, and we'll have this up soon, and ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in, and we will definitely catch you next time.